Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Friday, April 11th, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. Definitely a follow-up from yesterday's show. Some important things that I wanted to add on to a lot of what we talked about yesterday. Some interesting developments in one in particular that I want to show early in the show that I think is one of the best examples of what I've been kind of highlighting around a classic tactic, been used quite a lot, but more than I've ever seen right now in regard to sort of pointing at something that the power structure is very well aware that most everybody knows about in some way or another, and basically going that thing and then making that become some, vehicle through which to achieve a new agenda. It's just a really interesting tactic. And I'm going to show you this about something Gabbard said around voting, this bombshell that writes basically framing it as the voting machines are not secure. Like, I'm pretty sure, I don't know. I'd be surprised if there's literally anybody in any realm of the political conversation that is not aware of that's not just like that both sides have made that claim when it suits them. So it's a very interesting thing to see, but it's kind of saying we're breaking the information and see, they're showing you all the transparency. Or these weird little displays they have of them all sitting around the table and announcing like some kind of book report to Donald Trump, what they did. And it's all a show to let you feel like you're somehow on the inside when all it really represents is government saying things out loud, which I don't know why anybody who has ever watched any process, anything political, would pretend that a government entity saying something means it's true. The problem is they've convinced themselves that those people are different. Certainly hope you're right. All the evidence seems to suggest otherwise, but certainly hope you're right. But we're going to talk about some opening points that were basically follow-ups from yesterday's show that I thought were important. A follow-up on a quick kind of overlap tariff point that I thought was relevant, talking about Gabbard, but I want to start in earnest with the conversation about Iran. And this is a great article written by Strategic Culture Foundation. And it actually really interestingly ties into a lot of the points I'm going to talk about today. One, just the war-focused peace president, which is, kind of making a joke in the title, but the reality is it's kind of making a point about the propaganda versus the reality. And I'm not trying to suggest that Donald Trump is any more or less focused than any other president or government before on these concepts. They'll go to war when it's necessary for their agendas or to achieve what they want at the expense of just about anybody. But what's interesting is the framing today, kind of like the point with Gabbard. The peace president with, the facts don't really come to pass when the narrative has been jammed in by the people you're supposed to listen to. And this is more prevalent right now in this country than I've ever seen. But also the financial part of it, which we'll go into in the article. But the idea that just Yemen alone, over the last so many weeks, the U.S. government spent about $1 billion, having apparently zero effect on the outcome. We'll go into that. Actually, I moved it to more toward the middle of the show. But think about that in the context of spending and efficiency. Of course, the efficiency aspect, which we just talked about in the last show as well, on the Pentagon point, $1 trillion for the Pentagon, an entity that has failed 7 audits in a row, if you want to pretend that's what's really happening, and is contracted with like the 5 largest contracts, the spending aspects in this country, all military contractors. So if we're going to start somewhere to look at efficiency, that would be number one. But of course, I'm willing to bet you that never even comes to pass. The point is, they're not really trying to be efficient. They're trying to use that, as we keep highlighting, to get you involved or get you feeling like you have the momentum, when the reality is they're spending more, as we've already seen, than almost ever. And the reality is that even I think it was the first, I forget how many months it was, but they did a first kind of review and said right now they're spending more than at this point in the last administration. Now, yes, like I said then, maybe that's a means to an end, like the whole tariff argument that even though it's hurting everybody right now, it's going to be good in the long run. Maybe, but that shouldn't be something you just blindly accept because government says, because you feel they're not government. It's obvious what's happening, and I can hope for the best while acknowledging the blatant reality in front of me. And spending $1 billion to murder people in an impoverished country for another genocide committing country is obviously not efficient and also illegal. But I think that should matter more. But the point is that we're going to continue to highlight all the spending around this. But Iran, which that seems to be sort of a stepping stone for them to get to, is clearly continuing to build. Energy Secretary hinting at military action against Iran's global exports. Oh, actually, I'm glad I did that just now because it reminded me of something that I wanted to include. I'll just pop it up real quick so I don't forget to include this, a clip that you guys have seen many times. You probably even know what I'm talking about around Iran. Just important to remember that this is something that has been a long sought agenda left and right, and how willing they are to just, surreptitiously, secretly, I guess kind of secretly carry out false flag attacks. A submarine may go down. Who would know why? Patrick Clausen. It's a classic clip showing you that they're kind of almost in a joking fashion discussing open attacks and, acts of war against other governments with no legal justification because they can achieve what they want. And right now we're seeing that more than ever in, again, Israel's agendas through the United States. This is not an opinion. You can very clearly see this. Now you can argue that they align, sure, but then I'd love for you to outline the benefits of any of these things for the American people or even actually the U.S. government, unless they're invested in some, conflicts of interest type things around the world. The reality is on a very basic level, none of these things are benefiting the U.S. government. None of these things are benefiting the American people. They're not making things safer. And even from a national security perspective, unless you understand what that really means, which is not your national security, they're not even achieving those. Well, we're going to overlap with the whole Yemen point and the bombings that have continued and the fact that there's a disconnect between what's actually happening and what the narrative is in every conversation, including Syria, which we'll include one quick point about, or the lies around Ukraine and the ongoing funding for Ukraine and Israel that never stopped. And somehow we're framing that still as he promises kept. Or one of the central points today, which I'm actually, it doesn't surprise me, but I'm actually really shocked to see, I guess I'm kind of surprised, like in the sense that it's happening now or so right now, I don't think I've ever seen more conversation or more awareness around Israel's influence over this country, not Jews in particular, not Israelis alone, but the Israeli government, the Zionist structure. And that applies to a lot of things. And Donald Trump has now appointed an Israeli in his cabinet in the State Department to specifically monitor and what was the word? Make sure I say it right. And combat anti-Semitism, which is, by the way, something protected under your constitutional rights. But let's bring in an Israeli in the State Department to monitor Americans for speech, because that makes sense, right? Or unless you pretend like this is somehow the only one that matters or the only one that's allowed to be that. This is un-American. And it's not because he's an Israeli. It's because first of all, because it is an undermining of your rights, but because this is working with a foreign government to do so. It's pretty insane, but we're going to talk about that, and that falls up into the conversation of a couple of things about October 7th, which I'll say right now, but we'll get into more in the show. It's now been reported by the chief of staff, it's a conversation between a police officer and the chief of staff in the IDF, and talking about that there were bodies brought to the Nova Festival. Now, this is just a report. It's a statement made by the chief of staff and the information they have. Very reportable. But we'll be following up on this. But think about the importance of that. With all we know about the foreknowledge of October 7th and the lack of action, you could go on forever. The Hannibal Directive, for example, and the interesting overlap of that Nova Festival and how they moved it and the timing of it, and it all seems very set up. And that's an opinion that's largely being discussed in Israel, by the way. It's not somehow racist because it's something they don't want you to talk about. It is real and it's worth talking about. And what they're telling you is that the bodies, he's arguing that the evidence shows that there were bodies brought to the Nova Festival. So you could make that about Hamas if you want to make sense of it. The point is it's an interesting data point. We'll go over that and how this also overlaps with the conversation of what Israel is doing in the world and what they've done to their own people. And of course, the latter part, we're going to discuss the updates on what's going on in this country. The constitutional rights violations, the deportations, and a very important statement made by Ron Paul. Just simply because he's been a champion of this conversation for a very long time, and the Trump administration was very much trying to make it seem as if he was on their side, using that conversation, him and Massey and a bunch of others, which seemed to successfully trick a lot of libertarians. And I'm just glad to see that at this point, as I expected, no different, that he's standing up and saying exactly what we're saying. What's happening with these people, both Americans, green card holders, visa holders, and illegal aliens, is all wildly unconstitutional and illegal. That's not to say that we should not be deporting people who are here illegally. The point is they're all required due process. That is an inherent right. And we'll go over exactly what Ron Paul points out as well. But come back to the beginning. Let's start with the pointing of the article the show that we went over yesterday. Trump judge blocks deportations. I just want to make sure you saw that because that's very important. And I'm going to go over this more again as we get into that section. But it's important to remember that this is a Trump-appointed judge in Texas, along with others, I believe it was Boston, who pushed back on even the Supreme Court ruling, and that was the one before the one of today, of a 5-4 decision allowing Trump to continue the deportations, but, and this is the part that everyone's leaving out, requiring, which by the way, it's like requiring that you do what's legally required. It's like requiring it's hard. I don't know what a better way to say that. The point is they're requiring that he give them due process. And it's ridiculous to even have to say that out loud. It's like requiring that you do what the law requires. That's insane. The point, though, is that they reiterated that yes, you can keep deporting people, but you have to do what's legally required. And no one talks about that. And they just kept doing the wrong thing and are not giving due process. And that's why this judge stepped in and said, time out. The Aliens Enemies Act the first ruling was allowing them to continue under that act, but they need due process, which they're not doing. So the judge from Texas and the others followed up and said, no, you can't do that because this is not a wartime thing. We're not at war. The Tren de Aragua gang is not a state actor. And on top of that, they were only labeled terrorists 30 seconds before this because they knew how this process would go. And even though they did that, it's still illegal. And so he's saying, no, you can't use that. So the debate is not whether what he's doing is right or wrong. They're all agreeing that what he's doing is wrong in this conversation, in this part of the conversation. They're now debating whether or not it's entirely has to be stopped or whether he can keep simply doing so without let's put it this way, as long as he gives them due process, that he can deport them using that act. So ask yourself, why wouldn't they just give them due process? Why wouldn't they bring them? Well, one, they argue, it'll bog down the system. Well, okay, so following the law will bog down the system. That's what they want you to believe. Even if it will, it's still the law. So interesting, they can just pretend it doesn't count. But also, the reality is because they would be forced to present evidence to back up their claims. And the one thing over all of this that I have made clear that evidence shows undeniably at this point, they don't have any. Yeah, everything is a subjective claim about a tattoo that they claim relates, which even if it does, that's not enough to prove somebody is. And on top of that, we have gone over an endless amount of people who are legally in this country, legally, either because they were given asylum or they have a green card like Khalil or they have a visa, and also have no criminal record, and are some now in El Salvador that may never be seen again. If you're okay with that, then what is wrong with you? I just don't even understand a person who could be okay with that unless they're just simply a bad person who does not care about human life if it at all, or if it bumps up against what they want. But it's important to understand that this is a constantly evolving conversation. With Rubio's presentation, they're showing you we don't have any evidence. We are removing people because of what they think about Israel. That is not debatable. It's very clear. That's what they said to the court. They just say national security. So we'll come back to that. And the reason I'm harping this to start the show, I said this for the last week. I think this is the most important thing happening to Americans right now. It may not feel as such for some people, but you have to understand what this leads to. And that's why you're getting the Judge Napolitanos and the Ron Pauls that are standing up and going, this is monumental. And it's weird to me that the people who have spoke more about the Constitution within the paradigm are the ones that seem to be largely ignoring this. And I don't mean all conservatives, but I mean the team sport politics. So we will come back to that. We also talked about ICE wanting to turn, the administrator of ICE, speaking out about turning ICE into the Amazon Prime for human beings. That was his quote. Stressing that we need to turn this whole thing into more like a business. Yeah, so we can create a profit motive off human suffering, sort of like the private prison system. Isn't that what we all want in this country? It's wild how many things are going against what most people want in this country, and yet, I don't know, it continues. But that's why I'm of the mind that most people see this. I think that's quite clear in a lot of ways. Saudi Agris simply points out about the $1 trillion. Oh, and that was the other part of the show I already pointed out. $1 trillion military budget for the Pentagon is simply the continuation of the corrupt system. That is the military-industrial complex, which is the central part of this. I mean, how we don't see that by now is insane. And that's why I think it's important to check out Catherine Austin Fitts. Pretty much anything financial, I will point to her. In my opinion, as one of the best people to listen to, but always make sure you listen to multiple opinions, come to your conclusions about it. The bottom line is $1 trillion is unprecedented and is for Israel's wars, guys. That's not an opinion. Feel free to disagree with me, but if you look into the information and you recognize they're literally telling you it's because these people are bombing Israel, then what are we talking about? For you to turn that into some obsession is you flatly ignoring the evidence and what they tell you it's about. That's the insane thing about this. Everyone wants to make this about some kind of an obsession. It's like saying you're obsessed with Germany while you're watching World War II. What are you talking about? It's obvious. It's real. We're watching what they're doing. They're having celebrations about how many people they're killing. And you're telling me we're obsessed because we're pointing at it? That's my point about how average people are like, what? I mean, maybe we all should be a little obsessed with this. That's kind of the craziness of this, but we're getting that diminishing into the background. Now, he points out a $1 trillion military budget is odd because we don't really face any imminent threats. Israel does, though. Very clear point. I mean, I'm sure everyone will make a point. Look, there's clear things you could point out of threats of all kinds, of any point, at any time. The reality is real imminent threats in regard to warfare. Point it out for me. Other than the narratives about why these people want to secretly wink, wink, kill everybody American, where's the evidence? Israel, the United States, even the UK have far more evidence of them manipulating things around the world. The US and Israel more than anybody for marching into countries, bombing, executing, raping, and torturing, and stealing resources. That's not even hyperbole. That's documented information about pretty much every war you can look in that they've been involved with. So what's the imminent threat? Why is $1 trillion necessary? Israel is a threat. And why? Well, because they're murdering people, but that's a different conversation, at least for the moment. You are spending money for Israel's wars. And it shouldn't even be a contentious conversation right now. We'll come back to that. Other quick follow-up, just to conclude for you. Sayer, how do you say his name again? From Green Med Info. Sayer, first name, says, new study, vaccine and autism, a dose-dependent link confirmed. Now, this is from the IJVTR, and this is James Lyons Weiler's platform, or at least associated with the platform. And it's another study showing you what I think we should all know by now. It's one of these topics, like a lot of these we've talked about, that it's weird that it even is still contentious, like geoengineering or things that have like literally been accepted and examined and proven by multiple studies. I mean, even the US government, like a decade ago, or maybe a little less, was forced to admit, and they were really stressing, it doesn't prove that autism is caused by vaccines, but we can show a link. It's like, okay, well, it's like, isn't that the same? Like, yes, you could argue a link could be, correlative. The bottom line is there is evidence that already shows there is an obvious link, even according to the government. I think you can easily prove that it is transparent. The MMR vaccine, for example, very clear. And that's why it's frustrating to see someone like RFK Jr. start telling you it's the most safe and effective thing against vaccine. No, it's not. As even the CHD spoke up recently and said, no, it is dangerous and it is not safe. It is not effective. It is causing autism, which RFK would have told you last year. So it's frustrating to see as he comes out recently and says, or rather, Benny Johnson and the rest pointed him saying later in September, we'll have more evidence to break the bombshell that what's causing all the autism. Okay. I mean, if he stands up in September and says vaccines, we'll go, yeah, duh, you already told us that. Or if he stands up and says something different, that'll be very relevant, won't it? Either way, it kind of seems like a weird setup when we already know and he's already told us and the information's already there. And why are the Johnsons of the world going, look out to September, we're going to bombshell break the story? Because there's something else happening here, in my opinion. A just published peer-reviewed study confirms what many have feared. Cumulative vaccine exposure is associated with an increased autism risk. I think that's fundamentally obvious at this point with a lot of different peer-reviewed studies, but trust the science will tell you not to listen to this for some reason. Anyway, important to include, read it for yourself. It's a great platform. I think it's absolutely sound. It's just basically, if you remember, what they did is they set this up to where you don't need the government. Why would you need the government and other processes, bureaucracies involved with scientific peer review? You don't need them involved. So what they did is they set up an actuals, and these are highly regarded PhDs and experts and scientists involved with this process who are now peer reviewing science without the politics involved. I feel like that's very important. Now, another example of the yesterday show points, this one was about the Real ID point. If you didn't see, the House has now passed the legislation for the SAVE Act, which, look, same thing again, and I'll always say this so it doesn't get confused. I don't know why anybody would push back on requiring somebody proving that they're a citizen to vote in an election that is only for citizens. I think that's crazy that's where you get the false two-party breakdown, where they pretend that anybody pushing back on this is a Democrat who doesn't want to check for, that's not the case. I think most people are in my position, where we're talking about the obvious nature of that, and the left's crazy about it. And then over here, the right's also crazy about it because they're blindly ignoring the digital ID push that's happening within it. The real ID compliant identification is a stepping stone to digital IDs. It's in the documentation. So too is ID 2020. It's part of the same thing. So when they pass this, if the Senate does, and Trump will definitely sign it, in my opinion, this will be that stepping stone, as Derek was just talking about. And on top of that, as it says, Gary points out, for the first time in 17 years. Oh, the point is, don't forget, the real ID comes from the Patriot Act push. The real ID deadline is real for the first time in 17 years. Winning, promises kept, and all that, right? By May 7th, every air traveler 18 and over is expected to have a real ID compliant ID. Now, that, of course, you could, right now at least, you can still say, here's my passport, here's my birth certificate. And I haven't gone into it yet, but there is evidence already being shown that they're finding ways to push out even ones that should still be valid right now. Minor things, by the way. I'm going to go into that in another show, but the point is that real ID compliant means that you have a digital ID overlap with that real ID compliant identification, even if you can still possibly use this over here. And the point becomes that once they then box those out, well, then you are stuck with your digital ID. That's where this goes. And 12 Ball says, polishing off the last little bits of the Patriot Act that never got implemented. Thanks, U.S. government. It's not unique to Donald Trump, guys. It is the U.S. government. And I'll include this show, the SAVE Act Real ID, ID 2020, using two-party illusion to end the election to usher in digital IDs, as well as Derek's conversation we just had on the 10th, the slow change into digital ID, budding technocracy, and a fluoride win. If you didn't see that, he had an exclusive coverage breaking a story about Houston being the only place that he can really, if not the largest, one of the largest cities that now have completely removed fluoride from the water. Definitely a positive thing. Now, on a tariff point, also something we briefly talked about yesterday, I just wanted to follow up on this. This is today. So it shows you how this cascades, and it happens this way almost every time. Now, remember, the Trump paused for 90 days all the other tariffs going on, and that's the only reason things went back to somewhat some normalcy. If he had held the line, they would be doubling down like with that, and that's how this goes. So it's not some like tactful effort. This seems to me, I mean, you can decide how it ends up. You can decide for yourself. At the moment, it seems pretty clear to me that this was an effort. Maybe it would have worked if everybody would have backed down, but it didn't happen because I don't think it ever really does unless you're basically putting your thumb on a very weak nation. And they retaliated and it was causing more problems. The stock market was going bad. I mean, it hurt basically everybody except the Trump billionaire friends who made a lot of money, as they point out right here, because they must have known something we didn't. Maybe that was what it was all about. But China has now increased their tariffs on U.S. goods to 125%, up from 84% after Trump did the same. That's how that works. And of course, Trump was saying, I think Xi wants to come to the table. Well, that doesn't indicate that, but maybe we'll see more tomorrow. I just want to highlight that this is what most honest people were saying was the likely outcome. And that wasn't even me saying that I mean, it was maybe you could have argued that it was worth the chance. I don't agree, but you could argue that maybe he saw something we didn't and it was worth the shot to that was a tactic. But see, it's not I would argue the appropriate tactic here would be to try to use this to some kind of pressure, something you want. But when you recognize that it's going to spin out in economic warfare, if your actual drive is to make this better for Americans, then you would stop. And you could argue, well, it was worth the chance to see if we had leverage there. But that's not what they keep doing, is they push back like Solon children. After they do it, we do it harder. They do it, we do it even harder. And that creates resentment, at the very least, even with your allies. And on top of all of it, you suffer because you pay more for the smallest things. And we're already seeing that. People are showing images of random things they're buying online where you see tariff sales tax or whatever it's saying. Now, again, all that's not even to say you may still think this is the right direction. I'm not trying to make this necessarily a right or wrong. It's just trying to show you that this is usually how it goes. And anybody who spoke up and said probably going to happen were called Democrat, snowflake, whatever the narrative is to dismiss what they're saying. Black-pilled, the new conspiracy theorist. But here's what's interesting. Larry Fink, who Trump is involved in his processes, both administrations during COVID and now again, even though the right predominantly seems to call out BlackRock in any context except when Trump brings him to the inner circle, which is hypocrisy. But it says, we are now a global destabilizer. That's a direct quote from Larry Fink. Now, that's not saying we should be listening to Larry Fink. The point is, it's interesting to see somebody who is arguably on Trump's side in all of this who's now saying that was a problem. That didn't work. It actually is a bad thing. It says, speaking after BlackRock's Q1 earnings report on the call with Wall Street analysts, CEO Larry Fink said he was troubled by the size of President Trump's tariff war with China. The sweeping U.S. tariff announcements went beyond anything I could have imagined in my 49 years of finance. That doesn't really sound good, right? That sounds like Trump went way further than anybody ever thought they would, which kind of shows you that they either don't really understand the process or they thought they had more leverage. And at the end of the day, they're shooting themselves in the foot to stand their ground, except they pulled it back for 90 days and China's still continuing. It says, as of Friday morning, Beijing retaliated against President Trump's tariffs by hiking levies on U.S. goods to 125% from prior 84. The retaliation came a day after Trump hit China with an effective tariff rate of 145%, as both the U.S. and China are locked in a heated, once-a-century trade war. Yeah, but is this... I mean, like I said, historically, this leads to war. Most often. And what have we been being told about China for a very long time? I mean, this could be a means to an end. Maybe this is what they want. The peace president wants another war. And it says, this isn't Wall Street versus Main Street, Fink emphasized. The market downturn impacts millions of ordinary people's retirement savings. Yep. That's the point. So even if you believe he didn't want this to be the case, here we are. And now you have outcomes that are hurting average people, like a lot of us said was probably likely. And it says, yes, in the short run, we have an economy that is at risk, Fink said, but noted the artificial intelligence and rising infrastructure demand presents transformative investment opportunities. Because he's saying, don't worry, though, technocracy is going to save everything, which they seem to be really pushing on. Now, it says, to end the week, there are no indications that either China or the U.S. is willing to sit down and resolve trade disputes, while new evidence mounts that dislocations in global trade have begun to emerge. Amazon cancels orders with Walmart. Walmart pulls forecasts as tariffs take hold. Chinese sellers on Amazon panic after Trump's tariff bazooka, so both sides essentially. Tesla quietly removes Model SX order now button from Chinese site. And even Elon kind of spoke up, kind of poo-pooing a little bit on the idea of the way it was happening. Just interesting overall. And so the same point. Now, I mean, I've said well before this, and I am not an expert when it comes to economics. And if you want to listen to somebody, I recommend Catherine Austin Fitz. But I think what's basic about this is what we all, again, if you're just a student of history, if you've looked at how these things have gone, whether or not you truly understand the nuance of this specific dynamic or economics as a whole or anything, you can see patterns. And historically, we see how this goes. It's not hard to recognize. So that's why it was so irritating for people that simply went, well, that's probably not going to work the way you think it will. And you got screamed at by partisans, which is kind of how everything goes right now. And a lot of the people that got screamed at decided not to speak up the next time. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. They're driving people away from speaking up because, especially if you're trapped on the sides in regard to the partisanship. We see that where people speak up about an unpopular opinion on their side and they get eaten alive by their own people. Now, Trump also urges Mexico to, guess what? Honor water treaties from 1944 or face possible sanctions and more tariffs. So, obviously, if you signed a treaty and that's what you committed to, then yeah, you should be honoring that. But it's kind of insane to see somebody, Trump especially, but just the U.S. government at large, who, guys, they break treaties and agreements and resolutions and, without even batting an eye all over the world, whether it's the JCPOA or whatever Biden did last time, they just go, never mind, that's not the thing anymore. Because they don't like it or they don't agree with it, or we'll get to the Social Security numbers point about the immigrants in this country. Some probably are illegal, but not all of them. And the point is they just make these sweeping arguments where they just go, never mind, they did that and it was wrong, so we're going to take it away. And even if you agree with that it was done wrong, it's not the process is creating an opening for, in a general sense, the removal of your rights. In this case, my point is about them and how they're engaging. And the idea is if they violate damn near any treaty or resolution or agreement they don't like, why would you expect Mexico to hold to something that they probably don't even hold their end up to? Either way, it's a treaty from 1944. The bottom line is sanctions, more tariffs. You see how this starts? It's not instead of going to the table and saying, hey, let's talk. It's threat and power. Might makes right. Peace by strength ultimately ends up meaning war. $1 million budget $1 trillion budget for war seems to suggest something, doesn't it? And also, let's not forget, I'll include the article about this or the show. I don't know how I always do that, which is the North American Union, which is very obviously still on the table with Greenland and Panama and Mexico and all these things that really never go away. And this show is entitled, As Israel's Globalist Ambitions Become Clear, team sport Republicans like Alex Jones endorsed North American Union. You know, this very thing they were pretending to fight the entire time. It's important to remember that. Now, it says President Donald Trump on Thursday threatened Mexico with possible sanctions and additional tariffs unless it delivers water to Texas. Trump said that Mexico had violated the treaty under which it is required to deliver 1.75 million acre feet of water from the Rio Grande to the United States every 5 years. Under the same treaty, the United States is also obligated to deliver 1.5 million acre feet of water from the Colorado River to Mexico each year. How much you want to bet that's not happening? Trump said that Mexico's failure to fulfill the treaty obligation hurts Texas farmers very badly, citing the closure of Texas' sole sugar mill last year due to water issues. To address this, Trump said he had ordered the government to halt water shipments to Tijuana. Okay. So, as usual, guys, if you dig into the story, there's more nuance to it. Now, you could argue that there's some, I mean, look, let's also realize the GMO point where the U.S. government is basically strong-arming Mexico to accept GMO corn that literally nobody else wants. And they have like one of the most heirloom sort of corn, or what's the right word for it? Their whole food kind of ecosystem is based largely on, heirloom is the word. There's another word I'm looking for, but not GMO food. And the U.S. government is saying, we don't care. What you're doing is not giving scientific arguments, even though they're literally pointing to science that shows these things are hurting people. So my point is that you find all these overlapping points where why would you start pretending like you're needing to uphold your side of agreements when they're basically threatening you with war, which has been happening for a while. Now, yeah, my point is always about the principle. If you signed up to it, you should honor it. But we know as well as anybody that the U.S. government is not doing that. So I just think it's interesting. So overall, small point is just to recognize that these are just more, at a time when you seem to be engaged in multiple wars more than, this is going beyond even. They are at more wars now than we've been at for a long time. Even though they've always kind of been there, these are becoming very public points. Now, if this kicks off in an obvious way with Mexico, this is almost feeling like it's designed to bring this country down. But you can decide for yourself. The bottom line is threatening Mexico with more of the same tariffs and sanctions because they don't do what you want. Now, David Icke points out again to the tariffs, is this the most corrupt regime in American history? Think of the competition, but it must be right up there already. And this is Megatron showing Donald Trump was caught on video explaining that his billionaire friends made billions yesterday with tariffs and stock market manipulation. That's very simple, very clear. He goes, here's Charles Schwab, and they made billions, and he made 100 million. Okay. So you could argue that they somehow just, the bottom line is if they're making money off the way this is going, even if it was just because they, to make this very simple, if Donald Trump is making actions that are going to affect the markets, specifically around tariffs, and people around him who have inside information literally make money on that process, that's called insider trading, guys. That's crazy. Well, there's probably more terms than even that. There's probably even more specific when it comes to this insider, like literally along the president. The bottom line is it is not just a conflict of interest, it's a crime. But I want to be clear, they're all guilty of it. Pelosi's one of the most obvious examples of somebody who constantly does that. But they all do it, in my opinion. So it's not about partisanship. It's about criminality. If you want to know more about tariffs in general, Larkin Rose had a great video he did. Tariffs for Dummies. Given that vast amounts of astounding idiocy currently being spewed on the subject, he says, let's review a few bleeding obvious facts about the government extortion known as tariffs. Now, for statists, you're probably not going to like it, but it's factual. Now, Tulsi, Zero Hedge reports, dropping 2 huge bombshells, which I think is funny since, we kind of already talked about this recently. And this was about the other one, which they mentioned. That's one of the bombshells in this article is about the RFK MLK files are coming soon down the line somewhere in a day or week or, whatever. They're coming. I love that. That's my favorite. Breaking news. They said things are going to happen soon. Got to love that. Now, that usually is a mainstream media thing, but now the mainstream alternative media is making it their shtick. But here's what it says. Tulsi Gabbard drops 2 huge bombshells. National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard made a startling revelation during an open cabinet meeting Wednesday, announcing that she has evidence that electric voting machines have been tampered with to manipulate the results of past elections. Yeah, so breaking news, the sky is blue. I've got a lot. Now, let's be clear about this, by the way. It's not even sort of like the conspiracy theorists know that. Like, at the highest levels of the conversation, mainstream left and right, when it suits them, have made that exact argument. From left, Clinton herself, to, I mean, they have come up and said these things themselves, guys. Obviously, you know, the Trump and them have argued that's the case, but you can point out in intervals back and forth where they both make this case. Kamala herself, right before, was going, yeah, these machines are not, they're not secure. So explain to me how her saying this again is somehow a startling revelation. I mean, I'm honestly asking. I kind of find this to be weird. They expect, like, this is how dumb they think you are. Or maybe a zero head's just not aware that we all know this, or that there's 100 different videos, or they've had like symposiums on how clearly these things are manipulated, whether it's Diebold or now I haven't done it in a while, but there's like 3 major ones we've talked about. And I've done deep dives on all 3 of them, and how very clearly that they've been compromised for years and they still use them every single time, both sides. That's why you're not represented, guys. Now, here's George, one of these, blind partisan manipulators. Tulsi Gabbard just announced at the meeting that they're, whoa. Really? Listen to yourself, guys. It's not some big bombshell. I mean, literally what she's saying. We have evidence of how these machines have been vulnerable to hackers for a very long time and vulnerable to exploitation to manipulate the results of the game. Yep, old news. From Clint Curtis to every other election since. And, paper ballots, which, by the way, I would lean into that too. Okay. That's it. Whoa, bombshell. I just think that's weird. And if you go down and look, even George here is going, look, for years, Democrats blatantly told us. It's a weird way to frame that. Like, your argument is that they were surreptitiously telling you that was happening. It's like, the whole point is if you only view this through a partisan lens, things don't add up. When you stand back and recognize that it's one government using those against you, the point is they want you to hear it from one side when it suits their interests, right? So you can go, they stole this or they're not respecting that. And it goes back and forth, and you never solve the problem because you're only ever looking at half the problem. He goes, blatantly told us that voting machines were rigged elections. We didn't listen until they pulled off the fraud. Okay, so explain for me why they would go, these things are cheatable. We can manipulate these, and then go on to do that. Now, I'm not even saying that they aren't doing that. I'm of the mind there's a lot of that stuff going on, but from the real level, that they're aware that your votes simply do not even translate to the outcome. I don't know why we can't see that by now. It seems like one of the hardest things to sell people on, even though there's more evidence around that than damn near everything we're talking about. But again, that's the big bombshell. Other than the bottom here, it also adds, as you saw before, that Gabbard also announced that she is about to make public a huge amount of information relating to RFK's assassination and MLK. RFK, not Jr., but RFK, his uncle, I guess, or just his family. The point is, they've already said that. That's been discussed already. Those were already supposed to be on the way, that Bondi and Noam and everyone already told you. So her saying that again, but saying it's coming later, is supposed to be a bombshell. This feels very desperate to me. Maybe, whether or not for Gabbard or not, but the media Johnsons and the insurrection Barbies of the world who are like, "Whoa, we did it! We won! This is everything!" Every single time they open their mouth. Here's Charlie Kirk breaking the thing they said. We won. Worthy of ridicule. Journalists do not do jumping jacks every time the government opens their mouth about anything without any evidence. Here's Benny Johnson. Same thing. Every time. Yeah, we did it. It's over. Here's Libs of TikTok. Wow! DNI Tulsi Gabbard confirms the thing that we've all talked about, that you've posted about 150,000 times, that we've all proven, but it's a bombshell because now we won. Well, in case you missed it, guys, we've talked about this for a very long time. This is the most obvious. Computer programmer literally testifies under oath that he was coding computers to rig an election. Clint Curtis. It's everywhere. You find it on every media platform and probably has 1 million views. Here's one quick part of it, just in case you don't know it exists.
Mr. Curtis, would you please state your full name for the record?
My name is Clinton Eugene Curtis.
And where do you reside?
Tallahassee, Florida.
And what is your profession?
I'm a computer programmer.
Would you please speak into the microphone so the audience can hear your testimony?
I'm a computer programmer.
Mr. Curtis, are there programs that can be used to secretly fix elections?
Yes.
How do you know that to be the case?
Because in October of 2000, I wrote a prototype for President Congressman Tom Feeney at the company I work for in Oviedo, Florida, that did just that.
Not that it matters, in my opinion, since they all do it, but Republican, right? So the point is, though, both sides you can prove have been involved with this going back a very long way.
And when you say did just that, it would rig an election?
It would flip the vote 51-49 to whoever you wanted it to go to and whichever race you wanted to win.
And would that program that you designed be something that elections officials that might be on county boards of elections could detect?
They'd never see it.
Would you answer that question?
He goes on. He said they'd never see it. And the point he makes is that they basically do it. It's very simple. And that unless you literally know exactly what you're looking for, that you'd never be able to find it. And this goes back a long way, guys. This is not new information. Here is the actual article we put out. Well, actually, this was Matt Agarist, and we put up from the Free Thought Project. Computer programmer testifies. That was in 2016. Here's the actual post from 9 years ago. Computer programmer, same thing, testifies he coded to rig elections. And here's just some other articles we put out. I did use this because I made this as a meme a while back where it simply said, who did your voting machine vote for? But largest voting, this is 2018. Largest voting machine vendor in the US admits publicly that its systems had remote access software installed. Or this one's 2020. Voting machine fraud goes much deeper and further back than you think. This is the one where I go over the deep dive background of basically it was Diebold and two main others, all of which have even government reports that show they know these things are manipulatable, that they've done it, that it's proven, and they use them every time. The point about Clint Curtis is after he testified in that state Senate or state Congress and proved it, verified with his own information that he did this, they literally used the same exact machines for the next election. I don't know how you make sense of that without understanding that at some level they kind of want you to know this, I would argue, or maybe they just couldn't control his testimony. But the fact that they still use them shows you that they are either okay that they can be cheated on, or your vote doesn't even translate at all. I mean, it's probably somewhat of both. And this one, of course, don't forget, August 13th, the Israeli election interference and psychological operation industrial complex, where this guy was caught by major investigations from Guardian and somebody else as an Israeli spy literally controlling the outcome of elections. This was a huge breaking story that got very little attention. Surprise, surprise. Where he was on record saying, yeah, we've manipulated 100 and something elections around the world, many in the United States. He makes that on record claim. They have bot armies they're using to infiltrate different things like Twitter. It's the same conversation, guys. But don't worry, she's going to be giving you information coming soon about something that we all know. Insurrection Barbie says, Doge found that approximately 9,700 individuals with birth rates more than 15 years in the future have applied for $69 million of welfare benefits. Read that again. How does that not infuriate everybody? Well, it does, but it's not unique to one side or the other. This has been going on. Like, here's the thing. Yes, we should all want these things to stop. But if we're not able to recognize that this was going on during Trump's last administration and no one did anything about it, then how do you not recognize that they're at the very least, they're using something that they had a part in allowing to happen to gain your trust, I guess, or whatever else. The point, though, is that these things are being stated by people like Doge or groups. I'm not even suggesting that they don't exist or that's not true. I don't know that. My point is that neither does she and nobody else, because we are blindly being shown things that they say. Where's the source material? Well, let's just be sure. Here's the actual tweet. Are you expecting there to be any kind of a link down there? This $1 million follower account just types things out that Elon says and gets 400,000 views, and people act like that proves something. We know this has been going on. But here's the main point I'm trying to make from this. All that's happening. You get statements by people like groups like Doge that have already been shown roundly to keep getting caught lying. Matt Von Swol, who is marketing 215,000, former nuclear scientist for the U.S. Department of Energy, says, I'm just confused why no one is in prison yet. Where is Pam Bondi and putting these 9,700 people in prison? Now, whether you want that or not, the point is very clear. We keep getting these kind of statements. Epstein files, JFK files, and, social security numbers being stolen, Mozambique, whatever, USAID funding for different media things through the guy. Okay, good, fine. Prove all of it. And then hold anybody accountable? Isn't it weird that we keep getting told or find the deep state, and yet they keep claiming all of these grandiose crimes, many of which I think are actually true, and nobody's held accountable? Not one person is arrested? Oh, they're sure as hell going after people that are defiling Teslas. They're sure as hell going after people that are speaking about Israel. And why do those two things connect? I'm sure you can figure that out. They're not going after Epstein client list people. They're not going after anything associated with JFK. They're not going after, at least so far, maybe tomorrow. That is objectively possible, certainly tomorrow. But right now, it's wild to me that, well, you know why the insurrection Barbies of the world don't care, but it's wild to me that this is even still working on some, but it's interesting to point out, and I think the most irrelevant point is that I see more people like this. Look through the comments, guys. Like the post with Vance and Trump meeting Netanyahu on the White House response account, and 90% of the comments were, you're compromised, you're fighting for a foreign country. And now like this, if you look at these comments, and I argue they used to get a lot more reach on this stuff. People just aren't buying it anymore because it's not true. And not in the sense of what she's stating, but the reality, I said that poorly for the point I'm making. Whether the 9,700 individuals in this conversation are true, and I argue it probably is, and it's a bipartisan thing, the main point is they're using these things and claiming them, by the way, with really not much evidence, if at all, and not really following through with the major points. Like the financial side of this is the same idea. Here's Elon Musk saying, your tax dollars were going to pay fraudulent unemployment claims for fake people born in the future. Probably. And you can prove that these things weren't unique to Biden's administration, so they went back to Obama and Trump and everybody else, okay? So that matters. But the main point to make is that these things are statements. And I've already gone over many times, just on the last show, in fact, showing you that they keep repeatedly over and over getting caught lying. Even the last big claim they made. People are and I did it myself. You go through the actual receipts and you can prove that they're misrepresenting these things. It's not my opinion. Doesn't mean there's not some level of savings, or rather shaving off spending that shouldn't be happening. You can't call it savings when we're still wildly spending more than we're pretending we're saving. But the point is, Department of Government Efficiency says an initial survey of unemployment insurance claims since 2020. Okay, that's interesting, right? Reveal the following: 24.5 thousand people over, just all this money they're stating. Okay, well, I don't see source material. Why would you pretend you can prove that? Governments lie, don't they? Didn't RFK Jr. tell you that, right? Remember how many times he said that? My father told me when I was young. People in authority lie. That applies.
My father told me when I was a child, people in authority lie. And if we are going to continue.
That's the main point. Right. So it's not about only half of the people, only part of the paradigm. Government lies. Now, that's the point. So why would we pretend that we can take Doge at face value when they've already been caught lying more often than not, in my opinion? But that's not the main crux of the point. It's the same thing we're just doing. Brandon, by the way, this guy who is the walk-away point is that he was a liberal, now he's a Republican. The point is that he's trying to show Elon Musk that there's a malicious algorithm that is suppressing content for people they don't like and is raising content for people they do. And he keeps trying to call for it. He's posted the evidence. And Elon Musk and Macarino don't seem to care. So what that shows me is that that's not an accident. Either way, we covered that yesterday. He was responding to this going, who was collecting on these payments and when will they be prosecuted? Isn't that very simple? Well, let's get away from all the noise. Okay, give us the evidence and show us an outcome. Until then, it's all propaganda. If you have evidence people broke the law, why is nobody going to jail? Maybe it'll happen tomorrow. And of course, the larger point we made yesterday as well, that Elon Musk has drastically dropped the Doge savings goal from $2 trillion, which they were really pushing in the beginning. And by the way, we're already sort of claiming that they saved $1 trillion, like very early, to $150 billion for the year, which that was the announcement he made yesterday for the year-to-date point. Not the same. And on top of that, we can also prove that that number is actually not even accurate. Because of things like this, for example. $1 billion in 3 weeks to bomb an impoverished country for no real benefit, other than to do so for Israel. Strategic Culture Foundation. U.S., how you even say that? Maybe it's how Lindsey Graham says it. Maybe that's for a reason. Israel. U.S.R.A.E.L. So basically, U.S. and Israel as one word against Iran. Again. Now it says, quote, Iran has no intention of building nuclear weapons unless the United States forces us to do so. This is the message delivered by Tehran to Donald Trump, who in recent days has threatened to bomb the Islamic Republic if an agreement on the nuclear program is not reached, which is a joke. Seeing as how the last one they reached, the only reason it's not currently in place is because Donald Trump unilaterally pulled out of it. And that's what they've been saying, which is what I predicted they would say, which why would we deal with you again? And so now he goes, well, we're going to bomb you if you don't do what I want. The same thing happening everywhere you look. And it's embarrassing to pretend like that's not juvenile. And also kind of alarming that the juvenile in the conversation has a lot of weapons. And that's just, I mean, the U.S. government, by the way, don't take that as just Donald Trump. The bottom line is that this is what you would expect by the long-term repercussions of what the U.S. government has done. Now, before we go the point to make as well, this interesting conversation that I'm seeing develop into that we just kind of all know that Iran is likely now seeking a weapon. The evidence does not back that up, other than superficial statements that could mean that. The IAEA and the State Department recently have already claimed that they're not actually doing so, which doesn't mean that's the case. My point is that these statements were put out by politicians. Like a Lindsey Graham, for example, saying we're going to go bomb somewhere does not mean that's actually going to happen. But it could, for sure. You shouldn't dismiss it. We've seen statements from Iranian elements that have basically said that, the logic is that, which perfectly makes sense, by the way, that we have been driven to do so for our own security, even though it violates our religious beliefs. And that's why they've argued this entire time and have yet to actually do it, that they've never been trying. That's the claim. And that the evidence backs that up. And the only reason they've increased enrichment is because Trump pulled out of the JCPOA. That's very provable. And all they've increased has been allowed within the deal because of what Trump did. It was a clause they included that said, if you do that, we can do this. It's very easy to prove. And they went on going, they're enriching. And that's why it kind of fell flat, because it's easy to prove. That was a big, like they literally did that to be able to pretend Iran was breaking the rules, even though they broke the deal. The point, though, is that going forward to today, you understand the logic, a North Korea example, or even a Libya point, right? Where Libya does disarm in a nuclear sense, and then they murder him, overthrow the country. And now it's a scattered controlling. I mean, is it even Libya anymore? The map says that, but is it just a bunch of warring warlords and people taking advantage and open slave markets? That's what it seems like. Now, I shouldn't say it that concretely, because I'm sure a lot has changed over the years. Nonetheless, the point is, it was a country with one of the highest qualities of life in all of Africa. That was a provable point. Free education, free healthcare. Yeah, and it definitely had its problems, like a lot of countries do. They then completely destroyed it for their own agenda and then liberated them into this, a terrible situation that was worse than what they had before. The point, though, is that showed the world that if you do what they ask, then you get taken advantage of. It's a good lesson to learn. So you can understand why Iran might say, well, maybe we're just going to do it anyway. That's only just to explain the logic. My point is the evidence has not been shown that that's really what's happening. And the higher up leadership has maintained the reality that we are not doing it. It's a violation of our beliefs. So I just want to make that point, because I keep seeing this get brought up. I am in no way saying it's not possible. I'm open to the possibility, and it makes sense to me that they would do that, but the evidence does not show that right now. So I just think it's important that we don't allow that to become a narrative that seems to be pushed by people that appear to be not on the side of the partisanship, but tangential to it. And it continues to be this growing idea. And it makes sense, so it's easy to fall into. But then that will become the call for why they need to take out Iran, which is what Trump's kind of doing. Facts matter. Evidence is most important. Now, it says Trump's special envoy. Oh, it goes on to say, this is the message they sent to Donald Trump, who's threatened to bomb them if he didn't agree to their, I said that already. Trump's special envoy for the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. Remember, that was the person who basically was one of the names they kept using for the justification for why Israel continued to violate the ceasefire, offered to visit Tehran or to meet Iranian government officials in a neutral country. Iran outright rejected that proposal, stating that Witkoff is, quote, an irrelevant person, and that Iran is, quote, not interested in meeting directly with the Americans. That is a slight. And it's a justified slight, quite frankly, because they have continued to show that they're not honest actors. Why would you work with Witkoff when he was the central player, at least on the record, for how they completely just double-crossed every aspect of what was happening in Gaza? Now, it says, keep in mind that the total cost of the U.S. military operation against the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen is approaching $1 billion in just under 3 weeks. And there hasn't even been a significant change. The Yemeni resistance is strong and unstoppable. Now, as always, Iranian-backed is not necessarily inaccurate, seeing as how I would say Iran supported would be the way to frame that. But I mean, even then, I take that back, because you can see since the ongoing discussions that they have done everything they can to support them in their fight against what's happening. But it's not the same as them claiming that they are Iran, right? That this is Iran. It's the same point to make, that if you're going to make the logic that they're simply supporting them and even arming them to some degree, which rather selling them weapons, then that means literally everyone the U.S. has that relationship with is the U.S., the U.S. what in their argument, controlled entity. So, every time you talk about the UK, you would say the US run UK or the US. It's certainly could be the case. But the reality here is it's a misrepresentation to make you think that this is Iran pulling all these strings. When the reality is, in every one of these locations, you can show the US, Israel, Saudi Arabia aggressively manipulating what's going on the ground. The supposed leader of Yemen lives in Saudi Arabia. They've given up on Hadi. That's his name, because nobody believes that and nobody in Yemen wants him anymore. But they pretend that's the guy. And should they completely annihilate everyone in Yemen, they'll put him back in place and pretend democracy's been saved as he goes on to become yet another despot destroying people's lives. It says, meanwhile, Netanyahu is, and the point not to miss there is the idea that they've spent $1 billion to change nothing for Israel. And an impoverished nation that really, I argue, the idea that they would be, the only reason they're doing this, if you don't know the story, is because Yemen has been pushing back against shipping lanes that are delivering weapons for a genocide, which, by the way, is what the international community has ruled is your obligation, the U.S. included. So they're the only one actually following the law in this conversation, which is kind of crazy. It says, meanwhile, Netanyahu is ready to meet with Trump to discuss what to do, including the problem of the new tariffs that, by the way, have also affected Israeli products at 17%. That really blew up in your face. As former CIA operative Philip Giraldi commented, quote, "It is hard to believe, but based on the first 10 weeks in power from Trump, the Trump administration has actually made things worse for Americans than Biden would, due to the constant threats to occupy other countries, impose heavy tariffs on imported goods, and punish nations like Russia and Iran if they don't accept the conditions set forth by the new president." Now, you look, I almost feel like that was the way he framed that is going to push people away from seeing the obvious because people are so desperately tied into their two-party illusion. Whether you want to make it about Biden and Trump, the point is what he's doing is driving us in a direction that is simply bad for this country. And that doesn't have to be a partisan thing, guys. That's what the government's been doing for a very long time. Just recognize that this is not what he just listed off is these are fundamental. You could prove these things. It's right now how you can pretend that promises were kept because egg prices went down or whatever is a stretch at the best. It says, as Reuters reported, Iran is rejecting the U.S. ultimatum of either direct negotiations on its nuclear program or being bombed. Why would anybody? Do you think Trump would respond well to that? We're going to bomb you or do what we say? Clearly not. But it says, warning neighbors hosting U.S. bases that they could be in the line of fire if involved. Now, you could take that as a threat. Maybe it is. I read that more as that, look, if you are basically involved with what's happening, you're next, which is basically what we've continued to see. That these Middle Eastern countries who are being kind of coerced into supporting Israel will be the one next on the chopping block if they allow this to continue. And it says, although Iran has rejected U.S. President Trump's calls for direct talks, it wants to continue indirect negotiations through Oman. So what's important to understand is that Iran is not saying we're not going to find some kind of accommodation or a middle ground. We just don't want to deal directly with the United States for this conversation because they're not honest actors. I think that's important to understand. Now, it says Iran has issued warnings to Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Turkey, Bahrain, that any support for the U.S. attack on Iran, including the use of their airspace or territory by U.S. military during an attack, would be considered an act of hostility, saying that, look, if you allow them to use your airspace to bomb us, we'll consider you an enemy. That makes perfect sense to me. That's what it would show. It's not, you could even argue that's not even a threat. We're just saying, look, that's what you would become if you allow this to happen, which seems pretty basic. It says Iran's demands for a new nuclear agreement with the United States are basically as follows. The agreement must be an official treaty ratified by the U.S. Congress, which never seems to happen anymore, so that a future American president cannot withdraw unilaterally as Trump has done. Now, the point there is that even if they do that, they'll still probably withdraw like they do when they want anywhere else of the UN resolutions or anything for that matter. But the point is that at the very least they can make a case that this was illegal or whatever. Before, that's why the JCPOA was something they could just back out of, even though that was a violation of what they agreed to. And that, by the way, don't forget, it's the same thing they're doing today. That was Biden's thing, and that's dumb, and I'm out of it, even though the U.S. government, whoever was in charge, committed to that. Right now, they're doing that with damn near everything. No, Biden did that wrong, so we're going to revoke it all, even though that's what they're doing. Well, I don't want to jump ahead. We'll get to that. The reality being is, regardless of what you think about it, even if you want to argue it's actually illegal, the point is the president of the United States initiated something like a pardon, for example, and for them to swing back around and go, never mind, it just makes it, nothing means anything. There's no legal reality to that. Like if you're going to pretend that he did something wrong, well, then go after the action itself as opposed to the people who are suffering because they don't know who to listen to. But it says, before negotiations begin, the U.S. must remove sanctions on the Iranian medical sector and others. Again, pointing out the obvious that everybody knows, but no one wants to be honest about. They have been sanctioning average people forever. Food, medicine, everything. That's how they're meant to use these guys, or rather how they design sanctions to be applied. It makes the average people suffer, so they revolt on their government. It's very basic. You can look it up in their own documentation. So they're saying, stop doing the illegal thing you've been doing. After the agreement is signed, there must be a total reduction of sanctions, which means that all sanctions must be removed, not just some of them. In the event of U.S. withdrawal from the agreement, even though it would be a illegal action, Iran has the right to immediately apply a snapback clause, install advanced centrifuges, begin a rapid enrichment of uranium, and increase stocks. Which, by the way, at least with regard to enrichment, was the thing with the JCPOA. Same point. If you pull back from this unilaterally, then we have the legal right to increase enrichment, which, by the way, could be used at 90% or above for making weapons, but mostly used in everyone's case for research purposes, civilian programs. So this game they play, but the enrichment means weapons, that's playing on the ignorance of average people. As even right now, as I understand it, they're still quite a bit away from even getting to the level needed to begin to make weapons, let alone making weapons. But of course, that could all be a ruse. Certainly possible. But the point they're showing you is that if you pull out of this, again, if we do this, then we have the right to go back to that, which, by the way, every government in the world has the right to. Every one of them. The idea that they say that you're not allowed to is the same kind of thing that Israel gets in the reverse. They're the only one that's allowed to do X, Y, and Z. It makes no sense. It is special treatment. Iran must be allowed to reconnect to the SWIFT payment system in order to be able to carry out international transactions. Iran will be allowed to maintain its nuclear program, including advanced enrichment for research purposes. Because they have a nuclear program, that's not hidden. They claim it's a civilian program, which the evidence seems to suggest, including from the State Department. There will be no negotiations, number 6, or limitations on Iran's ballistic missile program or support for regional groups. Because just because you've been convinced that these things are evil villains, the point is every government in the world has the right to ballistic missiles. Every government in the world supports people all around them. The U.S. government more than anybody, and most everyone they support is probably the worst people on the planet. That's again, you could actually prove that by a U.S. report that comes out every year that shows that they support some of the most dangerous people that are most likely to commit war crimes in the world. It's objectively clear. Israel, Saudi Arabia, guys, it's not hard to recognize. The point is, number 7, Iranian financial assets frozen abroad must be unfrozen. Now, remember how this was played last time? How funny this would be. If the point last time is that they unfroze what the U.S. government had unilaterally taken from Iran, okay? And then they continue to pretend still to this day that Biden just gave them a bunch of money. No, they unfroze what was illegally taken from them. And if they do this deal, they'll do it again. And I'll be laughingly pointing out that the same thing will probably happen to the Democrat. Oh, Trump gave them money. It's the game of partisanship, and it's usually based on lies. It says, if any of these points are not agreed, the likelihood of the new nuclear agreement is extremely unlikely. Many of these clauses are the result of the mistrust caused by the previous betrayal of the United States. It says the effective downsizing of American power in the world. Oh, and I want to point one thing out about the nuclear agreement, right? Do you realize what they're saying here? So if the United States agrees to all of these things, which are basically the same as last time for the most part, then they will not seek they'll discontinue their entire nuclear program. That's the point. So how in the world could you frame this as them trying, wouldn't you the point like before is that you agreed and they did stop. And then Israel was going out of its way to make up stories about how they were secretly doing it. They were even caught, if you remember, trying to sneak in nuclear material to make it look like they were doing. And the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, caught them trying to do so in the bathroom. This was a huge story that got very little coverage in the corporate media. That's how this works. So all you need to do is agree to this, and they'll discontinue their whole program. And then the IAEA can continue to prove that. But you see, they don't want that. They want you to think that's what's happening. In fact, they even want to drive them to actually do it so they can use that as justification to go after Iran, which would be the final point. But it says the effective downsizing of American power in the world, this is strategic culture writing, is forcing Washington to redefine its strategies of control in the region, using the low-profile cooperation of other local players. Not only Israel with its influence, but also the Arab countries of the peninsula that are linked to the traffic of crude oil with the Americans. Now, it's an interesting point that we have seen the decline in American influence in the world, the U.S. government, rather. And what they're saying is that because of that loss of influence, that they've now redefined their strategy in the region and are now working alongside with, anybody, basically outsourcing their control mechanisms to other local entities. Now, the reason that's important is to show how the diminishing power, obviously, but that may well explain a large part of why they feel so desperately that they have to support the genocide Israel's committing, because Israel's a central player in their agenda for what's going on there, or the other dystopian or rather authoritarian governments they work with. So it's, the point is always, it's not about these people are not fighting for your interests. They never have been. This is about what they can do to achieve their ends. And it's not about what's right and wrong, what's legal. It's about what they can do to achieve them. Now, it says the United States Navy has 295 ships, and according to the USNI, 96 of those are currently deployed in the Middle East and in the Indian Ocean against Iran and Yemen. Iran and Yemen? I mean, look at what's going on in the world and explain why 25% of the U.S. Navy is positioned against Iran and Yemen. It's just, these are the villains protecting the villainy, guys. Now, that's not to say everyone on the ships, every American soldier, the Navy, it's the power structure who is deploying their power to support the worst thing we all see happening right now. In fact, to go after anyone trying to stop it. And that's just specifically in this point, Yemen. Now, and by the way, you could point out that I haven't seen much Iran doing anything to stop this, or Jordan or Egypt, like countries you would expect might have an interest, or rather the peoples through their government. That's important to point out. Why not? But it says a move on such a vast scale is not associated with simple tensions or limited conflicts. The United States and Israel are preparing, in their opinion, and I agree, for a full-scale war. And the first steps and tests of this process are taking place during the current attacks in Yemen. So 25% of the U.S. Navy has been mobilized. 26 ships have been identified. And 96 of them are deployed in the Middle East. The point is, this is not a joke. That's what they're saying. This is not some limited test. This is full-scale preparation for war. And that Yemen is their testing ground for where this goes. At least consider that possibility. Now, it says the usual strange American way of starting peace negotiations, with weapons, threats, missiles pointed, a curious interpretation of diplomacy, which we hope will fail definitively. They're just making a very clear point. This is not how you negotiate. And that's how the U.S. and Israel seem to do it almost entirely, which is to act like you're somehow negotiating when you've got a gun to their head. Nobody negotiates like that. That's why you're seeing the way this has been going the entire time. Now it says, however, it cannot be ruled out that this is in fact a huge media-driven deception intended to distract attention from the heart of the problem. For the USA, this would be an extremely disadvantageous move, exposing them to a great many risks. The, quote, hot negotiation style always works. I like the way they said that, even in these cases. So the respective parties to the dispute will try to provoke each other until they reach their maximum stress level. So when you understand the way they said that, yeah, it always works, which means this is what they're trying to accomplish. And that's my point about tariffs and everything else too, guys. You see how these things almost always go. And if you hold a gun to someone's head and you say, do what I say or else, that usually causes conflict. The history's clear. Now it says, on the other hand, as pointed out by some Yemeni media, the United States is focused on a war against the Arabs in favor of Israel. They are sowing discord, war, chaos, and conflict throughout the Arab world to fragment and weaken it, targeting its armies and nation states to impose a new plan for the Middle East under Israeli control on behalf of the United States. Or you could argue the reverse. The goal is to establish a greater Israel stretching from the Euphrates to the Nile in Egypt. We are in the presence of a new and aggressive American-led phase of colonialization and settlement to eliminate Arab nation identity, particularly Palestinian identity, and replace it with a new political geography called the Greater Zionist Middle East, revolving around the interest of the U.S. and its allies. The question remains, do Arab leaders recognize this reality, and are they preparing to face it before they and their countries are consumed? And will Iran be ready to react in time? Now, the interesting thing is if you what we've been talking about, guys, it's possible that is, these are elements that are trying to kind of play it down the middle. They don't want to be attacked, but they don't want to, it's hard to say. But what I believe, and you can look into for yourself, and we know what happened in Egypt, guys, as Trump famously said, where's my favorite dictator in his last administration, to Sisi? That's a regime change. They put these people in place. Now, All of these governments, the UAE, all these different overlaps, just like we're talking about in every other country, like we can see more than anywhere in the world in the US government right now. It is worth considering whether these governments that are seemingly undermining their own interests are simply plants for Zionism. That's what Zionism has been doing for 100 years. Or it could just be that they're being threatened, blackmailed in all the ways we know this works, or all of them combined. The question is, why would anybody be undermining what they are their stated interests? I think it's either that those leaders, if you call them the rulers of these countries, don't have those interests, or they do and they're being pressured not to care about them. But the peoples of these countries do, just like you do in this country. And the vast majority of left and right, or people that realize the illusion of it all, are calling out what Israel's doing. It's important to think about. And so what they're highlighting in this article is that will they stand up, or will this continue in that direction? I think it's worth considering how much of that is at play here. That what we're seeing are compromised governments. Now, in regard to the Iran point, the current energy secretary under Trump has already hinted at military action against Iran's global oil exports. Now, I figured I'd play this clip here. This is Patrick Clausen speaking about what they might want to do to Iran, but secretly in a very public and I guess jovial way. I thought I had it loaded here too. Oh, there it is.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. But I would just like to suggest that one can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition. It's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get nastier at that.
The Washington Institute for Near East Policy, Patrick Clausen. The point is obvious, guys. He's talking about illegal action. Just, no declaration of war as ever, and just sinking an Iranian submarine in hopes that they would then react and you could blame them for the impetus of the whole thing. That's how this works. And if you listen to what he's saying, that's why the claim, it's pretty hard to dispel at this point, that every major war has been started by a false flag goes back a long way. All that really means is the person who wants to start the war carries out an attack, blames it on the adversary, and then they get to point at it and say, that's what they did. Now we have to go to war. Oh, the forlorn hero, our hands are bound. Now we have to. And he talks about the I always say that funny, Lusitania. I can't even say that. The point is, these are past examples of clear false flags. And it's very simple. Or Lincoln, or, really, if you go back through every single one, you can see the examples, even a Pearl Harbor point, guys. These are not hard to talk about. You can see the evidence that shows that they were aware something was coming, and that's the LIHOP point. Now, anyway, listen to it for yourself, and then go back and research these things. If the idea is that they needed to wait for the excuse to do it, that means they wanted to do it. And the question becomes, did they make that happen to do it? And that's why you hear them laughing about this stuff. This is the understanding if you barely know this conversation. And I'm not talking about an assumption, guys. You could prove a lot of these. And that's why they're so desperate to keep people trapped in the partisan, limited hangout infrastructure. So again, Energy Secretary hints at military action against Iran's global oil exports. Right, while on a trip to Abu Dhabi, told Reuters that the United States is able to set up pressure on Iran and stop its oil exports altogether with force, if need be. Yeah, so in other words, a war crime. To acting forcefully to stop their transport of oil, which means action, violence, kinetic energy. There's no declaration of war. That's an act of war. Realize Congress has to approve these things, whether a declaration of war or an act of war, which applies whether or not you've declared war. They never do this anymore. That makes it a war crime. Lusitania, thank you. Just like the font. Someone gave me the phonics spelling down there. It's one of those words that, I'm sure you guys have picked up on in the past. For some reason, the word particularly, I always have, it's like for some reason, it just doesn't roll off my tongue. It's weird how those things work. So I'm always say it very slowly. This is something that's important to recognize. Energy Secretary hints at military action. They're what's the word? Kind of a foreboding thing. They're saying this is coming. It's coming your way. And that great clip from the Propaganda & Co. outlet, guys, it was like a 15-minute clip where they just laid it out. You could see that they're already planning this stuff. Now, Trump advisor Sebastian Gorka pushing for U.S. to escalate war with Somalia. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen, but I just want you to see where this sentiment is growing, that somehow the peace president needs to start conducting war everywhere for peace. Okay, apparently, the inversion of reality as usual. Well, the Houthi officials, the Ansarallah movement is their actual name in Yemen, say that Yemen will cease attacks on U.S. ships if they simply stop bombing Yemen, which I find this really interesting because at the end of the day, it's about the shipping lanes. Now, what they really say, I mean, was it this one? Yeah, right here. No, it says the senior member of Yemen's Houthis of the Ansarallah movement told Dropsite News that Yemeni forces will stop attacks on U.S. ships in the region if Trump halts the bombing campaign on Yemen. Quote, "We do not consider ourselves at war with the American people." Now recognize he did not say the U.S. government. Now he said, if the U.S. stops targeting Yemen, we will cease our military operations against it. Both President Trump and Pete Hegseth have said the U.S. would stop bombing Yemen if they stop attacking ships. So it's always this game of you have to do it first. Now it says, however, the Houthis were not attacking U.S. vessels when the U.S. restarted its bombing. So that shows you that's not true, right? That this is for something else. That they had already stopped and they bombed anyway. And so that's the point is now they're going, well, now if you stop, we'll stop. That's just, and they will always make it seem like they're the ones that started it. This is how this game always goes. President Trump launched the bombing campaign in response to them announcing they would reimpose a blockade on Israeli shipping due to Israeli imposing a total blockade on Gaza. So, again, an act that was a clear violation of the ceasefire they never followed in the first place. So they're saying if you don't stop breaking the rules, the law, then we will reimpose our blockade on illegal things being sent to Israel according to the ICC and the ICJ, right? And the U.S. goes, you can't do that. You can't do what's legally required. We're going to bomb you for it. And so they continued bombing. And the drone, there have been examples of them hitting the drones and so on. Now, remember, as far as I can tell, there's been 0 casualties. That's important. And they're not stealing and robbing ships. So let's not pretend like these are pirates. They're very clearly stating why they're doing it. They're not stealing. They're not robbing. They're not murdering. They're not hurting, it seems. And they're trying to make this out to be some ongoing terrorist attack. You know what the terrorist acts are? The arming, funding, and acting against the Palestinian people that is committing genocide. Now, it says al-Bukaidi said the Houthis would continue its ban on Israeli shipping and attacks on Israel until there was a ceasefire in Gaza, which has been every time they even had the momentary ceasefire, Yemen has stopped bombing. Pretty simple. It says when the Zionist entity stops its genocidal crimes, allows food, medicine, and fuel, we will cease all military operations. Pretty simple. So the point, as usual, is the U.S. government is fighting to maintain the genocide. Now, it says they would respect an agreement that would involve them not targeting U.S. warships or commercial shipping while they still enforce a blockade on Israel, but called on the U.S. to pressure Israel to end its genocidal war, which they won't do. And it says if Trump truly seeks peace, as he claims, his efforts should have been directed at pressuring Netanyahu to implement the ceasefire agreement that they signed, by the way, which included lifting the siege on Gaza, that was part of it, and allowing food and medicine to go in, and would have released all of their hostages, which is what they claim to want. I'll go over in the next show the ridiculous back and forth where Netanyahu is now claiming they have completely annihilated Hamas. It's like Trump and ISIS, man. It is the same thing. even though that seems to be provably not the case. And also they're meeting for new delegations very soon. So it's like, you're pretty sure you didn't annihilate Hamas if they are still at the table and clearly can prove that they are, I mean, in some arguments, basically not diminished at all. Now, I find that hard to believe. Usually both sides want to overrepresent what they have lost or underrepresent what they lost and overrepresent what they still have. But nonetheless, I think it's been pretty clear, as Robert's been highlighting, that they've really never been able to do it. In past wars, example, like the past 2 times they've gone in, they haven't even they've really not affected the outcome in regard to Hamas and their growth and so on. But the point here is, you know who is on the side of really seeking peace here. It's very obvious, other than people lost to partisan support. Drop site reported that they noted that Houthis have not targeted an American commercial ship since December 2024. See how false these narratives are? So they're out here screaming pirates and attacking Americans. And even as this continues, they have not attacked an American ship since December of 2024. Now, drones have been happening, but it says the Yemeni group began targeting U.S. commercial ships in January 2024 in response to the bombing campaign that Biden launched against them. So look at that. Biden and Trump tag teaming the same agenda as usual. Both Biden and Trump's bombing campaigns failed to deter the Houthis, as usual. The U.S. air assets over the past few weeks, despite they've been launching attacks on them over the last few weeks, despite daily U.S. attacks. From 2015 to 2022, the U.S. blocked a brutal Saudi UAE war, which was led by the United States government against them, which involved airstrikes, a blockade, and that's what most people don't factor into this. A decade-long plus starvation blockade bombing campaign that left this country as one of the most impoverished places on the planet. But now let's pretend like it's only because they're pirates. It never ceases to amaze me how much people can ignore. Now, here's what's important to recognize. They speak up and say, look, we'll make an agreement that if you stop bombing our civilians, which is what they're doing, then we will not go after your ships. And I don't know whether this means even if they're sending weapons to Israel. It's what it seems to suggest. So they put it out there. They could literally get everything they want if they just stop bombing this impoverished nation. Like literally the only thing they're claiming, which is about shipping lanes. And guess what they do? A couple hours later, they bomb Yemen again. That's what your government is about. 3 killed in U.S. airstrikes on their capital of Sana'a, which is a civilian-packed location. That seems like the only thing they want to bomb. They're not even going, it appears to me they're not even going after the Houthis. They're going after civilians that Israel points to in Yemen. This is overnight. Yemeni capital of Sana'a killed at least 3 people, according to the reports, which, yes, question everything. The point is, you know this is happening. They're not even hiding it. 3 citizens were martyred, they say, by U.S. aggression, which just means killed. It's just it's disgusting to me that these people pretend to represent us. Now, in Syria, since we're talking about foreign policy, Israeli forces have now again advanced deeper into South Syrians struggle under their occupation. So again, if you need any better example of how obvious the U.S. government fights Israel's wars, recognize how long the U.S. government's been putting Americans at risk, spending U.S. tax dollars to go after whatever they claim they're going after in Syria. And the moment they get them out of the way, Israel rushes in, takes everything. Opens bases, deploys people, and the U.S. just backs out of the way. That's kind of easy to see. I don't even need to explain what that is. Either Israel stole everything and the U.S. is too meek to say anything about it, or they've always been fighting for greater Israel in Syria, which, don't forget, is what this is, at least in large part, about. I'll include that. I think I've got it here. I just had that map, or that image I tend to show. There it is. It's weird that it's all the way at the bottom. So just recognize that this is, and it seems they have designs for more than this, by the way, but recognize this greater Israel project has been on the table for a long time. And they've been coveting all of this territory. And then maybe ask yourself why it makes sense that they've been in Iraq and they've been in Syria and they've been in Egypt and they've been in... Oh, now it all makes sense. And the U.S. government has happily facilitated this illegal operation. And the U.S. has now vetoed, because they care about them, right, the Syrian people, the Gulf reconstruction of Syria or Lebanon until Israel is satisfied. But yeah, but we're totally not just doing whatever Israel wants, right? Or the U.S. government is totally not, even though they have been talking about this forever. And the point is, we need to get Assad out of the way before we allow Syrians to go back to their lives. And so they've suffered the entire time. Now, finally, he's out of the way. And how long has it been? Even though they've let terrorists take control, they're funded terrorist, Al Sham, al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, very clear. And they've gone on to assassinate Christians and all the whites, rape and torture on in open daylight, on video, on TikTok. Everyone can see it, but they want you to believe you're wrong. And now when they finally go, well, maybe we can actually rebuild for Syrians, they go, no, Israel doesn't want that yet. Okay, great. Israel, let us know when we can help people, okay? Even though that's not what it's actually going to even translate to. Syrians are continuing to suffer. I don't always need to express my disgust, but it's just hard not to sometimes, guys. It's like every time, it's like, how are we letting this happen? Now, on a partisan overlap, because the Ukraine war hasn't stopped at all. In fact, it seems to be continuing to get worse. The point is that you still have these complete frauds out there saying, well, doing things like this. This person shares it going, this must never be allowed to happen again, as it's literally happening right now, because I guess that doesn't matter. Or at least they don't think that because they've claimed otherwise. And to them, Trump narrative is gospel, even though you can literally prove the opposite. What you're looking at for the podcast is Pelosi handing a signed flag to Zelensky in the Congress. And Cat Turd says, makes me sick just to look at it. I said, totally. Glad we're finally calling out Trump. Since the war is not stopping and the U.S. is still funding it, right, Cat Turd, right? Glad we can all agree that both sides, or more accurately known as simply the U.S. government, are the same. And in case you wanted to look more specifically to a, whatever you want to think is more partisan, the Grok example, where you can ask Grok specifically, is Trump admin still funding Ukraine as of April 2025? Yes. That shouldn't be a bombshell. It's pretty obvious, even though they keep playing this game like we kind of stopped it. We paused it here. The point was, from the very beginning, it's never actually stopped. Whether it's because they've been overfunding Israel, which they continue to fund Ukraine, or they've just deliberately kept dumping money in Ukraine's hands. Wasn't that the primary promise of the peace president to start, that these two would be done within 24 hours? Well, here we are, and now they're continuing more than ever. You know why? Because that's what Israel wants. But of course, you're not going to see any response to that. Oh, and by the way, just recently, Zelensky's confirmed that Ukraine troops are now in Russia's Belgorod region. Because it's totally ending and not happening anymore. Like Alex Jones, like I told you at the time, said, we did it. The Ukraine war is officially done. And it didn't even stop. But everyone still listens to him, apparently. Now, just in case you forgot, this is what's really going on.
Who has done more damage to America than any of our miserable presidents have done in all of their failed policies. Because Netanyahu has used America, misused America repeatedly, because the Zionist lobby is so powerful that Netanyahu basically has had control over the Pentagon to fight wars on behalf of Israeli extremism. And the war in Iraq in 2003 is a Netanyahu war.
Right.
The attempt to overthrow Bashar al-Assad in Syria starting in 2011 and continuing 14 more years of war is a Netanyahu war.
Right.
The overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, unleashing instability not only in Libya but across Africa, is a Netanyahu war. Netanyahu and his friends in the U.S. government, these arch-Zionists, so-called, have had effective control over the U.S. military. They have cost you and me and the rest of us as taxpayers trillions of dollars. It's quite a dandy deal that the Israel lobby or the Zionist lobby puts in, say, $100 million into campaigns, and it gets trillions out. Not billions, trillions out. And so when Netanyahu speaks, it's bizarre to me. It's not who Trump is appointing or naming. It's that the United States of America has let itself be used by a band of extremists on serial wars that have been disastrous for America's interests. Fighting Israel's wars so that Israel can maintain its extremism and its occupation of Palestinian lands and its apartheid rule over Palestinian lands is not in America's interests. And President Trump, who speaks for America, should be saying to Netanyahu, first day, I am president of the United States. You no longer run our country.
Right.
Bibi. That's what I hope.
Yep. And you can see this going back a long way. Now, to a more specific point on how this continues, the infiltration of this country at the moment. Donald Trump has posted on Truth Social that I'm proud to nominate Yehuda Kaplan on the United States Special and as the United States Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, ambassador at large. That's the State Department. Yehuda is a successful businessman and staunch advocate for the Jewish faith and the rights of his people to live and worship free from persecution. Which I don't, it's not a unique thing for Jewish people to not want to live persecuted. It's amazing how we can watch some of those persecuted people on the planet right now be done so under the guise of protecting Jewish people, even though we're really talking about Zionism. What's crazy to me, I don't have any concern about people, what religious faith they're. This is about an Israeli, somebody born in Israel, being appointed to a high-level position. Well, high level is debatable in regard to an envoy, but the point is a position at the State Department. And given the mandate of combating and monitoring anti-Semitism, which is a protected concept, like anything, anti-American, anti-China, anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, whatever, that's your right to think and feel. That's what we all know, constitutional rights. Inherent, God-given, not that they can remove by legislation. So that worries me for obvious reasons. So do not misrepresent this as being against anything other than the fact that there's another a dual citizen, Israeli, Chinese, Russian, whatever, who is in a point in the State Department and been given a mandate to combat and monitor your speech. It says he will be the strongest representative for Americans and Jews across the globe. Okay, do we want someone to represent anything across the globe? Or do we want people who represent American interests? Isn't that America first? Why are we even including a religious point in this? Because we're talking about anti-Semitism. Obviously, they want to make it about Jewish people alone. But do we have an envoy for anti-China sentiment or anti-Russian sentiment? It's not, you don't need a specific envoy. If you're going to make an envoy in this conversation, it would be about combating hate speech, wouldn't it? But you see, they don't want to say that because that's too woke, even though it's the exact same thing. And Gen X Girl says, so Trump's appointing Israelis to his administration. What the F is even going on? And that's the reality, as she highlights here. Born in Israel. So again, it's not to say that that's inherently evil, guys. There's plenty of people born in Israel right now who are calling out the genocide. The point is about the dual citizen dynamic. That's why Thomas Massey is introducing that. And by the way, not even to stop it, which we should eventually go to, and that's everyone's opinion, including Massey, it seems. It's starting with just making sure we know. And it's amazing to me how much pushback that gets. Why wouldn't we be allowed to know if you have dual citizenship? That's all he's asking for. I think we get to understand. I think the point becomes clear when you recognize how much of a conflict of interest that can cause for anybody from any other country who might come to a point to where their decisions might have to be split between two countries' loyalties. It's very simple. The only time that seems to become a problematic thing or maybe borderline racism is when it's about Israel. Explain that. Now, David Icke, in regard to this post, says Israel-owned, Chabad-owned, Trump nominates Yehud Kaplan, Chabad rabbi, as U.S., quote, anti-Semitism envoy, which, again, over all of it, why is it even, this should be something that specifically the right calls out. That is woke politics, guys. And it says Kaplan was initially connected with Trump by his Jewish mega donors, Miriam and Sheldon Adelson. You know, Israeli oligarchs, specifically Miriam, who are funding his campaign right now. Laugh or cry, either would be appropriate, he says. Jenna's girl also points this out. Now, just before we miss the obvious point, or, go past the point, it's incredible to me that that's not being completely screamed about right now. I mean, imagine he appointed a Chinese citizen to be in the State Department. Wouldn't that be a problem? It just, in and of itself, it begins to highlight how much of a problem this is. Now, she also points out another part of this clip. Now, this has been going out. This is basically a leaked conversation of the CEO of AIPAC. Gray Zone is one that posted this. And there's many clips of it. This is we showed you one the other day where basically he's saying Exactly what Thomas Massey said about an AIPAC guy when he got attacked for it. And he's on the clip basically saying that's the reality, which we already know. This one is even more interesting. He specifically, as she frames it, Elise Stefanik, or however she says that, Stefanik, is our spy. Gallup and peer research report 53% of Americans oppose Israel. Stefanik calls out 53% of Americans anti-Israel terrorists. Think about that. And says, if you're wondering why, it's because Elise Stefanik is an Israeli foreign agent, she says. Listen to the CEO of AIPAC explain. Now watch what he says here, guys. And here she is screaming about this. Stronger stand against anti-Semitism. This is the CEO of AIPAC. Now it's a little bit low. I won't jump in for 30 seconds here. Listen to what he has to say about the fact that they got these people in their position. And these are 3 people in Trump's current administration.
Talking about the people who will get appointed into some of these jobs. Look at the top level, you talk about Marco Rubio and Elise Stefanik, and Michael Waltz. Those 3 people have something in common. They all serve in Congress. They all have relationships with key AIPAC leaders from their communities. So the lines of communication are good. Should there be something questionable or curious that we need access on the conversation to? You know.
To recognize, well, let me go back to it actually, how you can clearly, they all served in Congress. They've all got relationship with AIPAC. Look, that is Rubio, Waltz, and Stefanik. I just think that's really important. We can prove that AIPAC is an Israeli entity that simply changed its dynamic. And that was after the JFK assassination. And he was on the record trying to get them to register as a foreign agent. Think about not acknowledging that provable fact and acting like we're somehow obsessed with a country, despite how clear that information is. Now, that's just one example of 1,000 different points. And these people scream that you're somehow just trying to make stories up. The people who are pretending this is not obvious are the people that are lying to you, or they're bad at their job. Now, here's another clip of the person he just appointed. And this is kind of overlapping the same thing we keep seeing from all of these different, the claims of the biblical right to take people's territory, or, these are the things you're seeing from the Zionist-packed administration. This is the person who was just appointed as the anti-Semitism envoy, an Israeli citizen who is now being tasked with combating and monitoring American speech.
That when people are chanting death to Israel, they forget that they realize the second part of that chant is death to America. And from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. They don't even begin to know the history. There never was a Palestine.
Speaking of not knowing history,
So I think it's important for people to understand that they're uneducated. These people are literally uneducated. These are our college students on campus chanting death to America, the land that they're actually studying in. They're chanting death to. Defacing monuments of American history, of people who came before them. History has taught us that we need to respect history and learn from history and not make the same mistakes. Unfortunately, in 2024, right now, we are making these same mistakes by allowing this type of anti-Semitism to go unchecked.
Yeah, I just can't make the point enough. It doesn't matter what you think about anti-Semitism. It doesn't matter if everyone or half this country just hates a certain religion. It is your literal right, protected under your constitutional rights, your inherent God-given rights to be anti or for anything you want, to think anything you want and say whatever you want. And the fact that we're now somehow pretending, just like the left was doing around pronouns and everything else, that they can just go, well, if you say that, what you really mean is you want to act violence against these people. It's the same exact thing. The woke dynamic on the left and the right, driving you to support something entirely different than what we think we're fighting for. We're really just the undermining your rights to get to the point of it, but for a larger agenda. How we miss that. And of course, somebody who's literally trying to pretend that Palestine never existed despite provable evidence. So that is the kind of people we're talking about. Those are the kind of people we're talking about. Now, Propaganda & Co. also points out, just an interesting side point, don't be fooled by the pro-Israel engagement on Twitter. The evidence is clear. Israel has lost support in America. And that's been not just the last poll. It has been a growing reality. That's why this conversation is in the corporate conversation. The algorithm has manipulated in their favor, especially on this platform. They are using bot farms. That's CHEQ. We've already covered this. That's an Israeli entity, or Authentics, by the way. Israeli intelligence completely immersed with what's going on Twitter. That's public information. Their accounts are boosted while our accounts are suppressed. This is documented. He includes links you can look to. Now, to overlap with this, we'll come back to in a second. Don't forget, the DHS is now going to be screening basically social media content for activity for anti-Semitism. Let's be clear. They're framing this as going after aliens, which, by the way, doesn't mean all illegal, but that's the assumption they want you to make. To do this, or to look at the bigger narrative about combating anti-Semitism, or what the envoy just said, that's not aimed at only aliens. They're trying to trick Republicans into thinking that's what it's aimed at, because it's aimed at you, guys. It's aimed at everybody. Anybody that goes afoul of what... The reality is that this is unconstitutional. I was just simply going to say in regard to Israel, but the point is that if you may not even think that. It doesn't even matter if you agree with that. If you can't recognize that this is a clear violation of your constitutional rights, then I would argue you either don't understand them or you don't care about them. And if this, about aliens or not, which the rights apply, it is still a violation. But then you stand back and look at what they're saying everywhere else, or Stefanik, they're telling you you're not allowed to hate Israel. You're not allowed to speak out against Israel. That's what she said explicitly more than once, not even mentioning the word violence. And as Patrick says, the Trump administration is basically functioning as a sock puppet regime for the Israeli lobby. The fraudulent application of the term anti-Semitism to decry any and all legitimate criticism of Israel is its policies, actions, human rights violations, war crimes, or apartheid ideology is extremely misleading and is now being used across Western countries to abuse and deny people's inalienable rights. Now realize you could point out Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, B'Tselem, going back decades, telling you that they're committing genocide, or rather specifically war crimes at that time, or that they're an apartheid state. And again, you're just obsessed with Israel. Okay, let's pretend that. Let's give that some thought for a second. Think about all the evidence we're seeing, and that you literally have half the conversation going, here's the proof. We know they're doing this. Fine, they may be wrong. But think about the narrative that you're obsessed. You're obsessed, even though you've got multiple human rights groups documenting their crimes, even though you've got them celebrating how they do this on their TikTok channels. But we're obsessed as they continue to literally break the law by starving people, by withholding the goods and the resources they need. But we're obsessed as they continue to work with U.S. government to occupy other people's territory in Syria and Lebanon. But we're obsessed. It seems pretty silly when you continue to stand back and look at how things are really obviously on the ground taking place, but we're pretending, you're obsessed with Jewish people. That's, again, in its own right, that's why this has collapsed, because even average people are going, come on. I mean, even if you believe that's part of the conversation, they're going, but look at what they're doing. I just saw a child's head blown off. It becomes impossible. Drop site news reports leaked data reveals, this is what we've been telling you, massive Israeli campaign to specifically remove pro-Palestinian posts on Facebook and Instagram. But we already know what's happening on Twitter. That's the overarching point. What we're finding out is this is a massive Israeli government agenda to suppress the speech of Americans. And the people that scream about the Constitution the most seem to be supporting it. Now, this is a quick overlapping point about October 7th that I wanted you to see before we go into the main point about, or rather one of the main points to finish around free speech, constitutional rights. Now, this is an article from Israeli media. Nova investigation revealed senior officer recordings on the dramatic hours the night before the massacre and the morning of the attack. There's plenty of things to read in here. The one that I think is important to highlight, which is really wild. It says, the subtitle, the bodies, quote, brought to the party compound. Now, the main point to read, it goes over a bunch of stuff about, the first bullet was shot, and because there was quite a few vehicles out there, they were forced to fail. The main point starts right here, where it says, there was also the tank event, which is still going around there. It's also a delusional event. They say, in fact, from 9/10, the whole business opened. They could go inside the compound, and they slaughtered the complex, leaving 220 to 230 bodies. This is the order of the size we cleared out of the compound itself, associated with the party a little less, which means a lot of bodies during this day have been lowered into this space. I have no idea why. And it goes on to say the police officer asking the chief of staff, what are you telling us? Or what are you telling us is that some of the bodies found there do not belong to the party? And he goes, as if they were brought there. The chief of staff says brought. So they're telling you, at least in the opinion of the chief of staff, that you could prove bodies were somewhere else, that he believes they were brought to this location. Now, of course, I'm sure the argument's already being cultivated that this was just Hamas who put them there for some reason. That's certainly possible. But with everything else we are seeing and all the foreknowledge and all the manufactured lies around this entire story, this is one more element that begins to add to the fact that this was some horrific event that they manufactured. At least consider that, seeing as how a lot of people, like someone like Efrat Fengenson, for example, who was in the IDF, who has been speaking about this right after October 7th to this very day, that she's convinced that they knew about this. It's just another data point. And what's crazy is the same kind of thing where people want to act like you're taking part in some grand... I'm not saying anything other than what the Israeli chief of staff says to the police officer in this interview. You know, to make it out to be some effort to highlight things, I'm just pointing at what they're telling you. And they're telling you, it seems to them, that these bodies were brought there. You know, in the concert that was suspiciously moved to be in the wrong location right before this takes place. Or the videos we have of them being trapped behind the cars where the Israeli officers are using them as human shields. On and on and on. Just worth considering that. Now, I want to point to this account that I'm not familiar with, but she's the one that I saw this link from, so thank you for that. It's JP. And then here, don't forget, by the way, this is from October 7th, coverage from December 3rd, 2023 from The Cradle. Border surveillance footage from October 7th just disappears. You already saw this from before, but I thought it was relevant to include in the conversation, seeing as how we are continuing to find more evidence that shows there was something pretty weird that happened. And back on December 3rd, back when people were super distracted, we just lost all the information, sort of like, a million other stories we could add to where they go, yeah, well, we just don't have we lost it. Accidentally burned it. Looks like we destroyed it and we can't do it again. And here, just in case you want to see it from Israeli media, which I'm glad you would want to see both, senior officers wonder, where did the recordings from October 7th go? It's a mystery. Hardly. Ynet News, don't forget this one. Also relevant to the same conversation. I can't believe this didn't get more coverage. This is right after October 7th. Music festival massacre survivors involuntarily committed due to mental breakdowns. Or at least that's what we were told. You know, people that probably were privy to things that we really weren't allowed to see. And either way, involuntarily committed people who were just, that's like the United States taking everybody involved in a shooting and forcing them into a mental institution. It's exactly what happened. This is the kind of, added to the long list of examples of what this government really is. Now, to give you to end an update on the overarching point that I'm really continuing to drive home about the unconstitutional actions of your government right now. I want to start with a great post from, this is an activist post, shout out to Charlie Robinson and this great platform, and posting from the Ron Paul Institute, free speech is worth fighting for. Now, I do find this important for many reasons, because he's right, and because what he's highlighting is what's going on, but let's stand back again and recognize that this was an entity, a person who they tried to make you think was going to be part of the fold. When in my opinion that was never even on the table. They just wanted you to think that. Massey, same point. And even Ron Paul said, yeah, I'll work with you, which I was worried about. But he probably just, I would argue from what I believe about Ron Paul is that if he would maybe try to work with them, and the moment he realized they were not doing what he thought, then he would call it out. Probably why they never actually tried to let him in the group. But this is what he's saying right now about what the current U.S. government is doing. We do not have free speech to talk about the weather. We do not have free speech to talk about the weather. Our founders, particularly James Madison, who drafted the Bill of Rights, understood that our rights are not privileges granted to us by our government. No, it was understood at the founding that these basic natural rights outlined by Madison were granted by our Creator, and thus no mere mortal could take them away. And first among these is the First Amendment, which recognizes the most basic of our natural rights, the right to express ourselves in any way we wish. Now, that first line is simply saying it's not just about the weather, right? It's about anything and what's important. The reality is, first and foremost, that as we keep pointing to, as Scalia ruled with Reno versus Flores, or 14 different Supreme Court rulings, or the reality that you can just simply read the 4th, 15th, other amendments that the reality, as he's pointing out here, that these apply to people. As the 4th, and it says very clearly, any person. Some of them apply specifically to American citizens. In reality, the way you can read the breakdown for as it applies specifically to the point, but the general idea, specifically due process, that's Reno versus Flores, Scalia's ruling, that especially with deportation cases, illegal aliens have the right to due process. The point is that expressing yourself, wanting to speak about Israel, wanting to speak about Russia, doesn't matter. You have the right to do so. Illegal aliens, visa holders, green card holders, American citizens, the principle's the same. And so the reality is that first, we're talking about them speaking about what they want. And your government's going, nope, you can't do that. And then not giving them due process rights because they're claiming they're breaking the law somehow and kicking them out of the country. So that's a double violation of their rights, if not more, probably more. Now, it says, unfortunately, the U.S. government has not always been in accord with this sentiment and has many times in our history been at war with our freedom of speech. See, it's not about right now. It's about an ongoing process of left and right, really just your government. From the Alien and Sedition Acts at the beginning of our republic to Abraham Lincoln's war on speech, to the jailing of anti-war activists during both world wars to Kent State. The political class is all for free speech unless it's threatening the political class. Recently, a new front has been opened in the war on free speech, and it is one that Americans must take seriously. On university campuses across the country, students, both Americans and foreign guests, have taken to protesting U.S. support for Israel's actions in Gaza. You know, a genocide that the world can clearly identify legally, where tens of thousands of innocent civilians have been killed. The political class in the United States is determined to defend Israel from its critics and has responded to these protests by threatening and blackmailing the universities if they do not crack down on speech that the powers that be do not like. Both Presidents Biden and Trump have used the power of the U.S. government funding to demand a crackdown on speech they don't like, with President Trump recently pulling $400 million in federal funding from Columbia University if they don't silence the protesters. The real scandal is that nearly every U.S. university, both public and private, is government funded in the first place. For the politicians to use the power of the purse to deny students the right to express themselves, as long as peaceful, just adds insult to injury. Last week, a Turkish PhD student at Tufts University was arrested on the street by plainclothes government agents for reportedly simply writing an editorial, and that is the reality. In every piece of documentation they present, that's what's going on. And they didn't present their names. They didn't present a warrant. This is extrajudicial at this point. They're breaking the law. And the university editorial at the newspaper was simply expressing views on Palestine and Israel, at which we showed you and linked to, and you can read for yourself. It's about as, I mean, I want to say the word benign. In the context of the way they're framing it, it was benign. But she was calling out Israel's genocide, right? I mean, it's contentious in that sense, but in no way, even a side point was somehow, could even be misconstrued as anti-Jewish or violence or terrorism, not even remotely. Their game is to pretend that if you support Palestine, therefore you're a terrorist. And I mean, that seems to be like right on the surface right now. Despite when you push at it, you highlight that, they pretend it's something else. No, it's about violence. Well, show me the violence. Now, she faces deportation from the country, and she is not alone. Marco Rubio has openly bragged about sending hundreds of students home because they express a political position he disagrees with. It's crazy that we're even saying this out loud, and we don't all agree. Others, including American citizens, have been expelled from their schools and have even had their degrees rescinded. Now, we don't talk about that enough. Now, yes, we have yet to see American citizens removed from this country, which they've now floated 3 times to El Salvador for wrong think. But let's not forget that you've had American students for speech expelled from school, had their degrees rescinded, even though they paid for this, even though they didn't break the law. Now, we're talking about people that were not charged with a crime, guys, for peacefully expressing, Ron Paul writes, a political position that powerful people in Washington disagree with. You may also agree with the political position of these students, But to cheer their punishment by the U.S. government is to turn your back on the founding principles of this country. Freedom of speech is a natural right not reserved for American citizens, but for all of humanity. And it has been a natural right worth defending for nearly 250 years. Until now, apparently, for some people in this country. First, they came for foreign students expressing controversial positions, and many Americans cheered because they were not foreign and did not like the opinions. But make no mistake, this war on speech will not end with only foreigners being punished. It never does. Well done, Ron. That's exactly what people need to hear, because it's the truth. Now, in case you didn't see it in yesterday's show, I want to play this again. Because yet again, it's another influential person on the right who is absolutely calling this exactly like it is, and in not even remotely mincing words. He says this is very I think he even uses the word terrifying. I agree with him. This is not a joke, and this should not be passively cut. This, as I keep saying, is, in my opinion, the largest current problem. This is what Americans should be focused on more than anything right now. Now, that's that you can decide what you want. Even myself, I'm focusing on what's going on in foreign policy, in some cases more. The point is, though, if you want to understand my opinion about what Americans are most threatened by right now in the context of the immediacy of what your government's doing, it's right in front of you.
In some respects, it's just as bad now, the authoritarianism that is coming, Gerald. I am really, really fearful for the President of the United States of America to suggest, as he did on Air Force One on Sunday night, that American citizens could be deported, for his press secretary to say, we're looking into a way to see if this is legal. We don't know if it's legal or not. A, is terrifying. B, betrays such a profound ignorance of first principles to which he is sworn. He is sworn to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and to enforce federal law. Before we came on air, I was telling you about an American lawyer on vacation with his family flying back to Detroit, where they live, and stopped at the Detroit International Airport and held up by Border Patrol for 2 hours, refusing to surrender his phone because, quote, we know you represent Palestinians. And eventually they backed down and let him go. But that type of intimidation, that type of chilling, was actually under arrest, and arrest is defined as you're not free to leave, is profoundly un-American, utterly unconstitutional, and I'm sorry to say is coming.
I agree, sadly, unless we do something about that. Now, here's an interesting overlap to this. I mean, I almost don't understand why he keeps doing this unless the agenda is something much, more like we're talking about kind of the just breaking down of this country. But it's insanely funny to me in one part of this that you keep having Elon Musk do this, where it's like Obama was doing the same thing. And I'm like, are you thinking these things through? This is him saying makes sense about something Clinton is saying. You know why? Because Clinton's supporting the idea of deporting people without due process. And my point's like, okay, like, I don't think this is okay. There's only two things to take from this. Either, so that yes, all of our government is breaking the undermining our constitutional rights. Yes, I agree. Secondarily, that you're all doing the same thing, left and right's the same, right? If your point is to somehow argue that what we're doing makes sense and it's trying to get like left people to think that, how do you not recognize that Republicans are going to go, wait a minute, now we're doing what Clinton does? That doesn't feel right. It just seems like they're so desperately trying to kind of mash this all together, I think. I mean, you think what you want. I just think it's funny to me. I don't think it's a point that's taken well by the right to point out that what they're currently fighting for is exactly what Clinton was calling for before. And my only point, as you'll see, is exactly, you're all the same, using the two-party illusion to control our lives. The rest is narrative. Here's what Clinton had to say.
So I think we got to have tough conditions. Tell people to come out of the shadows. If they've committed a crime, deport them. No questions asked. They're gone. If they've been working and are law-abiding, we should say, here are the conditions for you staying. You have to pay a stiff fine because you came here illegally. You have to pay back taxes, and you have to try to learn English, and you have to wait in line.
Right, or none of those things, and you have the right to do whatever you want. You know, like it's just wild. This is the same conversation. Now, you can argue there's a level of like decorum or respect that you might expect from people that you're going into somebody else's country. And that, by the way, the opposite of what most Americans do around the world. But what's interesting is that the main point to start with here about the deportation point.
I think we got to have tough conditions. Tell people to come out of the shadows. If they've committed a crime, deport them. No questions asked. They're gone.
Well, that's not how that works, okay? If they committed a crime, then you present the evidence and that you see it's the same conversation. But I just want you to recognize that your government, as far back as you want to look from both sides of the paradigm, have been trying to undermine these things because your constitutional rights are a thorn in their side. But they always want to, the other side is the one doing that. We're trying to protect it when it suits their interests. And it flip-flops back and forth. And as Corbett tells you, these stepping stones of the two-party illusion continue to progress the agenda until we're about to see Americans deported. Well, you can pretend that evil Democrats are the one that want to do that while you're literally doing that, as long as you want to, not to make it too stupid. The point is clearly, guys, it's the same thing. They're doing the same things. They're on the same side. You are being played if you don't recognize that, in my opinion. Makes sense. So Elon Musk is agreeing with Clinton. Do you agree with Clinton? I thought Clinton was the bad guy. Well, here's where we are now. Press secretary. All foreign nationals present in the United States longer than 30 days must register with the federal government. Okay, maybe you agree with that. You realize that doesn't say illegal aliens. That says foreign nationals. Okay. Now look, if you look this up specifically, that there's the overlap is clear. Foreign nationals specifically means a person who is not a naturalized citizen of the country in which they are living. Right? So that doesn't necessarily, the overlap is the point I'm trying to make is what we keep seeing with this conversation, where you have people that come into this country who are not immediately citizens, but who are going through a process. And that's not even the same as the point we're going to get into with Biden just basically waving his hand and making people not illegal, which, by the way, is an important point to make, though. This is about people who are literally coming up and saying, I want to seek asylum, or even just, I want to go through the process. I want to become a citizen, and presenting themselves to the Border Patrol. And then they have been deporting those people in the middle of that process, acting like they're here illegally because they don't have citizenship. But they're not here illegally if they're trying to, it's infuriating. And even on a more broad sense, the entire conversation from those that don't want to talk about this honestly, who are aggressively partisan, are just the default is everyone's illegal. If they're pointing, they're MS-13 criminals, they're all here illegally, even though the ones they're pointing to you can prove aren't either of those things. So I want to highlight that first. Now, secondarily, even if you're an illegal alien in this country, don't forget, you still have rights. As Ron Paul told you, as Judge Napolitano told you, the reality here is that what they're saying is that you just have to register with the government, even if you're not necessarily here illegally or breaking the law. And doesn't that feel wrong? Don't we have a history of putting people on lists? You have to realize that what this really comes down to is categorizing, tracking, monitoring the American population, or just people in this country, which they're already doing to you. Now, I think this whole thing becomes problematic when you recognize what they just told you we talked about yesterday, whether Holman or the rest. We're going to use artificial intelligence. We're going to use technocratic measures to be able to control all of this. And you get the Republican right. They go, yeah, because bad illegals, except that's the exact thing was proposed for COVID-19. Same thing proposed for shootings before that. Almost like they just use whatever's in front of them to get you to agree to what you might otherwise dismiss. Here's what she said.
Line for registration under the Alien Registration Act is today. All foreign nationals present in the United States longer than 30 days must register with the federal government.
Oh, and the other point to make, by the way, is because there is the overlap which I showed you that would include illegal aliens in that category. Okay, so if you illegally and surreptitiously get into the country, same thing really. So they don't know you're there is the point. You're living in some small town somewhere, working, whatever. And they don't present themselves. How do they know they're there? So effectively what you get out of this is the people who might otherwise want to comply, not the real criminals who would just hide no matter what until you catch them. So it seems like they're going for the lowest common denominator, which we're going to get to more in a second, where they're just basically getting rid of literally any immigrant here legally or not, who have like traffic tickets or small, like we'll get to an example in a minute where there's a woman the guy was trying to rape her. And she literally punched him in the face, and that's on the record, and they deport her for some violent act. Not because it just happened, because it's something that happened before. And that's not to say that everyone they're deporting is, or rather that, first of all, again, they all have due process rights. It seems that none of them are being afforded that. So no matter how or what the conversation or how bad of a criminal they are, yes, they should still have evidence presented and go through that process. That being said, I guarantee there are people who are in that process, whether without due process, by the way, but still might be criminals. Not denying that. But I'd love for them to prove that, wouldn't you? So you just don't have to take the government's word for that, as we already know many examples of people who are here legally, who don't have criminal records, who are rotting in El Salvador prisons. Matters to me.
Must register with the federal government. Failure to comply with this is a crime, punishable by fines, imprisonment, or both. As President Trump and Secretary Noem have both said, if you register and you leave now, you choose to self-deport. You may have the opportunity to return later legally.
Now, of course, the point is that they also have this overlapping conversation with the Social Security point we're going to make in a second, which basically is people that there's an overlap. People who were here legally, who were given this, people who were given legal status by Biden's administration. The point is they were given Social Security numbers and legally are on the record here legally now. Whether you agree with what Biden did or not, that is the reality. And look, I agree. I don't think what Biden did I don't think that should have happened. I think that's an abuse of power. It doesn't change the fact that he's the president of the country and they dictated these people would be allowed in the country. Okay. We're going to come back to it. The point is that there's a whole category in there of people who they just yank their Social Security numbers despite legally being in the country and are now saying they have to remove themselves because they're no longer allowed to be here. Even though it's just unilateral and they're not following anything, especially not constitutional rights. And so what they're saying there is that you have to self-deport yourself. And that's really what that conversation was. That's the large part. They're telling those people you got to get out of the country. So they have lives, they've got families, they've been living here for years in some cases, and now they have to go, where? In some cases, back to countries they were fleeing from for persecution or from countries the U.S. government was destroying. These things absolutely matter. Now, overall, do you think they're going to just let these people back in at this point when they have already got them listed on the record as people they've kicked out of the country? I mean, it just seems like a trap. And a trap for people who would otherwise be willing to work with the authorities. You think the people who are out there breaking the laws are going to run up and go, okay, you got me. Take me out so I can come back in legally, even though I'm a criminal. I mean, it's like the same thing with the gun conversation. All you do with those is go after people who are legally people that are willing to abide by the laws. The criminals break the laws already. It's just infuriating that we have to make these kind of points when how obvious this stuff is.
But if not, you will be arrested, fined, deported.
If they find them, which they won't if they're criminals and they're hiding.
Never to return to our country again. The Trump administration will continue to enforce our nation's immigration laws. We will not pick and choose which laws to enforce.
Well, the laws were already there. That's not what they're doing. The laws have been there the entire time. They don't need the Aliens Enemies Act to deport people, but they did anyway because they're using that to circumvent the rights. That's what's really happening. They're pretending this guise of a process and acting like we're following the law, but the process itself is what's allowing them, they think, to circumvent the law, both constitutional and national, I guess. That's what's so disgusting about it, is they're just like every other piece the government does. They present themselves as the moral authority while the one most undermining it.
We must know who is in our country for the safety and the security of our homeland and for all American citizens.
Yeah. And guys, that means you too. But don't understand, that's already part of the process. You're already being monitored. That's from COVID-19 and 1,000 other ways. So just recognize what they're normalizing is the idea that you agree with that. Do you agree? They need to know everyone in the country and monitor everybody to make sure we're all safe. You may have been convinced that that's what the world needs right now. But at the same time, at least acknowledge that is a contradiction of the way this country was designed, the way that we believe that we're supposed to exist in this country with privacy and rights and, protection from the law and, search and seizure. I mean, everything. We could go over 100 different points of why what they're talking about violates those things, whether it's because they're spying on you in your home or monitoring what you buy or any number of things or telling you can't think and say things. These are fundamental principles, foundational ideas that we're still arguing are part of this country, while literally what they roll out undermines those things. Now, here is the article, one of them around the conversation of the Social Security numbers. Now it says pressuring migrants to, quote, self-deport, which is a weird thing in its own right. White House moves to cancel Social Security numbers. So obvious point to begin with is they already have them. Now, this weirdly, by design, dovetails with the argument that they're giving out Social Security numbers to illegal aliens, or that these are all fake numbers or whatever, which is a whole different conversation that I guarantee overlaps to some degree of people that are abusing the system, right? Whether politicians or not. What this specific conversation is about, and they really want you to blend those two conversations, is about a situation where the Biden administration gave these people, in some cases, numbers when they didn't have citizenship, or other cases where they were applying and so on. It's a mixed bag, and they always want it to be about one specific thing. Now, again, in case you forgot, I've never argued that people who are here illegally should not be charged with a crime if they've broke into the country. That's not the same as somebody who's presented themselves as a border patrol and is trying to seek asylum or citizenship. Just because they haven't reached either does not then make them in limbo illegal aliens. The overall, though, I will never argue that somebody, if you're here illegally, that's a crime, and that you should be charged for such. If you're an illegal alien or not citizen, you should not be voting. That's simple, guys. These are basic realities. That doesn't mean that the wild, extreme part of that is the same, which is that there's a whole middle ground of people who are here on asylum, who are, in some cases, illegal aliens, who have been granted citizenship by the last president. And I said already, I think that's ridiculous. Like, just to wave your wand and say these people are, the point is, citizenship was a process. Now, you may disagree. I mean, frankly, from a non-statist perspective, which is where I would rather be, none of this means anything. They're all imaginary lines. But again, since we're being forced to exist within this society, that's something that is the reality of it. And my point is that overall, you can't just disregard that the previous president has said these people are granted citizenship. It's the same as Trump waving his hand and saying, you no longer are a criminal. It's the same difference. So going into the article, it says, the title is Pressuring Migrants to Self-Deport, White House Moves to Cancel Social Security Numbers. Subtitle is By Placing Migrants in Social Security's Death Master File, which is supposed to be for people who are dead so they can keep it on file. The Trump administration is seeking to cut off their access to credit cards, bank accounts, and other services, by the way, which are theirs. Credit cards in their name, bank accounts with their money in it. I mean, if you're really trying to be objective about this is just wrong in a lot of different ways. There's a way to go about this if your aim is actually trying to remove illegal aliens who are here illegally, who are breaking the law, who are criminals, as opposed to just anybody brown who you can jam into that category surreptitiously so you can meet some kind of metric for your radical base. I don't mean even the majority of conservatives. Now it says the administration is taking drastic steps to pressure some of those immigrants and others who had legal status to self-deport by effectively canceling the Social Security numbers that they had lawfully obtained. Now, I get it. I understand that they believe, and even maybe you even want to argue that what Biden did was illegal. And maybe you're right. The point would be, then you need to go through the process and prove that. Present the evidence, make the case, but that never happens. They just unilaterally act under a political argument, and that's not enough, guys. That's why we're rapidly going in the wrong direction. So if you believe what Biden did was illegal, then make the argument, make the case, present the evidence. Otherwise, what happened was, and I disagree with it too, he allowed these people legal status for a multitude of reasons, some of which were fleeing. I already went over it. And so that is the reality. Now, also, don't forget that other than that, too, there were people who were in other positions, like I said, fleeing from countries seeking asylum, who were also included. But that's not the same thing as an illegal alien, for example. The point is, like I already said, they're seeking asylum. So just understand that before we read the rest of this, because right now you're going to get the argument that these are all the, fake Social Security numbers, people who are illegal aliens trying to rob the system. And it's all just to make sure you don't understand that these are, in many cases, people who are, as we keep being told, seeking the American dream and went through the process the right way, or were granted such by the president. Are you going to tell me that if Donald Trump decided to allow the Afrikaners in this country, they would be illegal no matter what, even though Trump said, come on in and you're okay? That's the same point, isn't it? Oh, but it's okay because they're South Africans, so we don't care. How is that different? He's going to let them in. He's going to grant them citizenship. Do they, that's what will happen. He's already said that. So it's a hypocritical thing if you are actually being honest with yourself. Now it says the goal is to cut those people off from using crucial financial services, bank accounts, credit cards, along with their access to government benefits. The effort hinges on a surprising new tactic. repurposing Social Security's death master file, which for years has been used to track dead people who should no longer receive benefits, to include the names of living people who the government believes should be treated as if they are dead. Like, so alive people here legally who they're just deciding to make dead on paper. The initial names are limited to people the administration says are convicted criminals and suspected terrorists. Oh, we played this game before. The documents show. But officials said the effort could broaden it to include others in the country without authorization. So, as we've already proven that many, if not the majority of people that they've already deported were not criminals, in some cases here legally, who were not part of these gangs, and they just said terrorist, MS-13, rapist, murderers, they just go as hard as they can. In this case, they're simply saying suspected terrorists. Now, look, convicted criminals is a whole other conversation. You know how many Americans are convicted criminals? And I mean people like whether it's a cannabis charge. The point is that that doesn't revoke your citizenship. In some cases, they try to make that the case, which is also unconstitutional. The point is that either way, the Biden administration gave them legal status, which I disagree with, but you don't just pretend that doesn't exist. So they don't get to go back and go, but they broke the law 10 years ago, get them out of here, which is what they're doing. Go through the right process, prove that it's a crime, present the evidence, same argument. But officials said the effort would broaden to include just others without authorization, which, remember, they're claiming that means these people who all did have authorization. Just, like this is like them saying within the law, which means nothing today. What they're doing all over the place is a violation of all sorts of laws, but they say it out loud and their supporters pretend that's absolute. The move, it says, is the latest in an extraordinary series of actions by the Trump administration, pushed by Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency to harness personal data. Always the central part in this, long considered off limits to immigration authorities in order to advance President Trump's vision for a mass migrant crackdown. This week, several top officials at the IRS moved to resign from after the tax agency said it would help locate undocumented immigrants. So again, that's the Trump administration. You can, if it's easier to ignore all this stuff, if you just want to secretly pretend they're all Democrats somehow, you're lying to yourself, but go ahead and lie to yourself. The point is that you keep seeing examples of people, but even within his administration, suddenly getting uncomfortable with things like this. We just saw a Trump-appointed judge. I'm going to point out that in a second again. Stop him from doing what he's doing. This is the current IRS under the Trump administration, and you got people resigning because of what they're doing. The new enforcement role for Social Security is raising fears that faulty data could result in people, including American citizens, mistakenly or improperly being placed on the list, upending their financial lives according to interviews with current and former employees, or being rushed off on a plane to El Salvador before you even know where you are, because that seems to be their thing right now. And maybe they don't even recognize that you're actually an American citizen. That would be a good way to get it started. Not to be, blithe about it, but that seems like what they're getting into. The list included, so the people they're talking about, don't forget, the point was convicted criminals and suspected terrorists. And the list included a 13-year-old and 7 other minors, raising fears inside the agency that it was overly broad. Yeah, you think? A 13-year-old, probably not a convicted criminal, probably not a suspected terrorist, but we already know they're lying about this stuff, guys. They're getting caught left and right. And it says, according to one person familiar with the list who spoke on the condition of anonymity. So this is another person from within the establishment who's speaking about the list that only the government has access to, who's saying it's being overly broad. A lot of that's happening right now. Don't forget that. The White House official said that nearly 1,000 of the migrants had received federal benefits worth a total of, this is actually pretty interesting to me, that the White House official said that nearly 1,000 of the migrants, which seems like a pretty small number in the context of what we're talking about, had received federal benefits. Again, people who were given legal status, so that's not that shocking, worth a total of roughly $600,000 before their parole was cut off, including Medicaid, unemployment, insurance, and federal student loans. Now, remember, I disagree with the entire thing that was done here, but the point is that now that they were here, I don't see it. You could disagree with what Biden did, go after him for that. The point is that they were given status, so these things shouldn't be that shocking. But then it says an average of $600 per person. So try to wrap your mind around them wanting you to be outraged, the Trump administration, for $600 a person for people who are legally in this country. But we don't care about $1 trillion for a group that has failed audits 7 times in a row. We don't care about tens of billions of dollars for a government committing a genocide. We don't care about the Trump administration continuing to promote mRNA shots or, I mean, on and on and on. But $600 a person for people who are here legally, whether you agree with how it happened or not, is what you're supposed to be outraged about. In a memo addressed to Dr. Dudek on Monday, Cristian Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, wrote that the plan would, quote, prevent suspected terrorists who are here illegally from having privileges reserved for those with lawful status. Okay, let's make sense of that. Prevent suspected terrorists, so you don't even know for sure whether they're even criminals, who are here illegally. So how do you know they're there and suspected terrorists if they're here illegally? If they're here illegally, go arrest them and put them in jail. You see how weird, and this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. These are things that are being constructed, in many cases, like we saw with Doge, that you can probably aren't even real. The bottom line is, if they're here illegally, then they should already be in jail. Especially since you're claiming they're suspected terrorists, which means you know who they are, right? From having privileges reserved for those with lawful status. I mean, you want to explain for me how people who are suspected terrorists who have no citizenship are getting privileges reserved for lawful status? I know that does happen. My point is that's not what otherwise is being pointed to here. They're pointing to people who have legal status. They're just trying to confuse everybody for the interest of, obviously undermining your rights. But you know what this all ties back to, guys. There's only one government out there who is screaming about this being the most important thing when most Americans don't agree. I'm not even talking about immigration. I'm talking about the focus on people who are calling out Israel. You don't need to look further to understand what that ties back to. And realize suspected terrorist, according to the Trump administration, means people who support Palestine, people who've been to a Palestinian protest, people who think Israel is committing genocide. They've stated that. So when they say within the law, that's what they mean. Meaningless. Now, Associated Press, on the 10th, reported the Social Security lists thousands of living immigrants as dead to prompt them to leave, Associated Press says. Now, that's just to follow up on the story, showing you that they're just simply saying that we're just going to move you onto a list of dead people to say you got to get out of here. Does that sound legal to you? Just because you don't agree with what Biden did, you just do something else illegal? It's the same thing. It's just one entity trying to confuse you, in my opinion. Now, this is the one I thought I was getting to. We'll come to that in a second. This is CBS News. I want to make the point about the overlap to this. And I haven't gone into this in depth, but the whole Social Security dynamic, there's been a huge amount of disruption despite them swearing that wouldn't happen. So right now, as we've already seen them going after just whoever they claim is, actually here legally, but they go, but Biden, so they're technically, we don't agree with that, so they're legal. And by the way, in that pursuit of a nebulous thing they can barely define, they've also folded in people who are Americans who are getting their benefits. Social Security wrongly told disabled people and some seniors that the benefits ended. See my point? Now, whether this is because they're just pulling strings, they don't even know what it's attached to, which seems to be Doge's thing right now, or these are people that got swept up in the whole claim that they thought they were illegal, even though they had legal status. The point is, this is constantly happening. Here's another example. Oh, I thought I had one more. Oh, I hope I didn't lose that somehow. Oh, well, I'll skip it for now. This was the next thing. If you just take the second to look it up, there's a lot of examples going over the last a month really, where people are going, look, I was told my benefits have been canceled. They didn't show up this week, like all over the place. Now, whatever your thoughts on that, and I have plenty of thoughts on social benefits, the point is that is the current reality. And they promised it wouldn't be affected. And now as they're in their kind of sprawling effort to go after anybody who might be connected, they seem to be taking down Americans too. Maybe by design. Now, Bad Kitty Unleashed points this out. Tom Homan says, yes, they will take away the Social Security numbers that were wrongly given to illegals. As my point, though, is even though you can prove that not everyone was illegal, some of them were in the process of seeking asylum. That's the game they play. But it says, and they get deported to boot. Bad Kitty Unleashed says this answers a huge concern of mine. Now, I don't know exactly how he sees that. It's hard to say based on what he's pointed there, but the point is, I'll play you what Tom Homan here says and why I think this is a problem. Now, here, as we look at this again from the Rapid Response 47, let's take a listen to what this obviously very intelligent man has to say.
Legal, taking away their social security numbers.
Absolutely, because they're released in the United States illegally. The program was unlawfully used, and we'll make sure these people are removed from the country. They didn't make a legal entry. They didn't come in here under legal entry. And I've been saying for the last couple of years that the Biden administration, we're bringing thousands of people a day into this country by abuse of the parole statute.
See, first of all, just, can you at least enunciate for us, man? I mean, like this, I think at the end of the day, I think these people are chosen for a very clear reason. I'm embarrassed and it's not just this current administration. Look at Biden stumbling around, guys. Think about this stuff. My point, though, regardless of the criticisms of this very clearly intelligent person, I think the point is he's basically already told you in this for opening response that you disagree with what Biden did, but you just made it clear that he went through a process, right? And so the argument is the president of the United States has dictated through a process these people are granted citizenship or legal status, as it were, in some cases. Like I said, if Donald Trump, who, by the way, has already floated the idea of bringing the Afrikaners from South Africa into the United States and giving them citizenship, you want to explain to me, Tom, why that's different? It's the president waving his hand and saying, come on in, you have citizenship now because I said so. Granted. Well, I disagree with that on either side of it, but you understand the reality of how our apparently ruled by edict situation in this country is, and it's been that way for a long time. So the fact that they're just going, instead of going after Biden's choices or the system in place, or kind of doing that too, they're going after the individuals who were granted this status by the president at the time. That should, outside of the partisanship, that's wrong. What they're doing is wrong, whether or not it was abused by Biden, and now it's being abused by Trump. Overall, these people have been granted that status, and all he's doing is revoking that. Now listen to him again.
Even away their social security numbers.
And again, it's not just illegals in this conversation, which you can prove. Some of them, yes. Before Biden granted them status, which would then make them by legal status not illegal. But even before it, there were some that weren't. Just like the conversation of the deportees that were seeking asylum, had visas, green cards, and so on. In this case, we're talking about people that were seeking asylum.
Absolutely, because they're released in the United States illegally. The program was unlawfully used, and we'll make sure these people are removed from the country.
Yeah, so the program, not by any action of their own, right? So Biden said, come on in, we're going to give you this status. So he is the problem in that conversation. Biden illegally used the program, he's claiming. Why are you going after these individual people, by the way, who don't have criminal records? What's going on there? Is that what we all thought this would be about? Well, if you're cheering about it, it's because you just want to go after immigrants, which I think says a lot about you, regardless of whether it's justified or legal, which seems to be a lot more than I would expect, by the way, but I still don't argue it's the majority.
They didn't make a legal entry. They didn't come in here under legal entry. And I've been saying for the last couple of years that the Biden administration, we're bringing thousands of people a day into this country by abuse of the parole statute. Even a district court judge in Texas said not only were they ignoring the law, they actually violating the law. Well, we're going to enforce the law in the Trump administration.
Okay.
Except these judges right now are saying the same thing about you guys. Literally. Both Trump-appointed judges just said the same thing. Wholly lawless is what they called what you did to El Salvador. But you see, they just love to point back at the evil Democrats to make you just pretend like everything they're doing is okay. That's how the partisan illusion works. They're currently breaking the law in just as many ways, if not more.
You can literally scatter.
All right, that was an accident. Where was I?
On the Trump administration.
Okay. Are you going to use IRS information to find the illegals?
We hope to. I mean, this is about protecting the American taxpayer, protecting their Social Security information. And we know for a fact illegal aliens use American Social Security information to apply for jobs.
And I don't disagree with that. I mean, there's a whole ecosystem of fraudulent activity, guys. That's very clear. Quite frankly, I believe that it's sort of, facilitated to some degree by just left and right, but about more of a manipulation. But overall, these are different conversations, especially since what we're talking about is people that have been granted legal status.
Security information. And we know for a fact illegal aliens use American Social Security taxpayer. We hope to. I mean, this is about protecting the American taxpayer, protecting their Social Security information. And we know for a fact illegal aliens use American Social Security information to apply for jobs.
And plenty of people with citizenship use your Social Security information to rob you. That happens too.
Myself, my wife's Social Security number was stolen by an illegal alien that affected her.
My wife's Social Security number was stolen by illegal alien. You know, I know these are small things, guys, but it's crazy to me. The kind of people that are representing us right now, who are, I don't find to be smart people.
Credit rating takes a long time to get it fixed. So this happens 1,000 times across this country. We're protecting Social Security for the people who deserve it, for the people who paid into it for decades. We need to protect it for those that need it and those who are authorized to receive it.
Yeah, so what he's conflating very clumsily is the idea of people who are here illegally without citizenship who are abusing that and robbing people. Yeah, that exists, just like U.S. citizens doing the same. No one should deny that. What he's pointing to while pointing at that, to conflate the two, are people who are not doing that. People who have jobs, people who have careers, or have just got here and they're set. And the point is they've been given these things and are paying taxes even. That's all. That's in the conversation. The Social Security is the whole point. They're paying into it, not robbing you. That's why they were given legal status. Like, you can look through all of this. Now, like, there's probably some points, some overlap, but the reality is what they're revoking by and large, are people who are actually in the process, not abusing the process, other than Biden abusing the process to get them legal status. You know, I get why this can get confusing for some people, but the core is about the misunderstanding, the deliberate deception by people like this of your rights. Or maybe he doesn't even understand it. He does call Spanish Mexican, so, you know, maybe he doesn't grasp it. At the end of the day, this should be alarming for every American. Now, here's another clip when she was asked specifically about the same press conference about Garcia. Right. And so as we recently went into, and I'll play this clip next. So the Supreme Court had ruled, as we said before, that they could continue deporting people, even using the Alien Enemies Act, as long as they were giving them due process, which they aren't doing and don't care about. Seems like they just pretended that wasn't part of the ruling. Now, the judge that was appointed by Donald Trump in this article, he stood up and ruled that, well, no, you can't, because technically that act is a wartime act. Technically, it's supposed to be against a state actor. Neither of those exist. And you just unilaterally declare them a terrorist organization, which is what makes you think you can make all this happen. Either way, they're required to have due process. That's the point. That doesn't change, whether they're saying keep deporting or not, that they are afforded constitutional rights by default. So the point is not one saying he's doing it right, one not. They're both saying what they're doing is wrong, but you can keep deporting people through the normal legal processes you currently have or the Aliens Act as long as you're giving them their rights. The other judge is just simply saying, no, he disagrees with that entirely, that they have to go through the normal channels of deportation. Either way, they're supposed to present evidence, guys. So coming forward from this, we had another Supreme Court ruling, I believe it was 9-0, we'll get to in a second, basically arguing they are absolutely required to bring back Garcia. And the way this has gone even since then is just insulting. But the point is that they're now saying that they're going to bring him back or that they're going to help facilitate it. They're nitpicking about the different terms, which is very interesting to me. But I want to highlight, Bukele is now coming to the United States. As somebody asked right in the briefing, well, is he going to be bringing Garcia? It really would be that simple, especially since this is not a criminal who was here legally. That's important. He was seeking asylum. And the point is that he was not even remotely connected to the gang, as they've now proven. And that's what they want you to believe. And they're going, well, it's not our responsibility. You're damn right it's your responsibility. But here's what she has to say when asked about that. Come on, the point is to her response, but also just to recognize that they could just send him back as soon as they wanted to. But seeing as how the American government, the U.S. government, is paying them to hold him, they're just playing everyone for a fool who believes that they're telling you the truth.
Salvador is coming to the White House on Monday. Does President Trump want him to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia with him?
The Supreme Court made their ruling last night very clear that it's the administration's responsibility to facilitate the return, not to effectuate the return.
Which, by the way, they pushed back on. So they're pretending like they got what they wanted, like they usually do, when the reality is they push back on all of it, and the judge just simply folded on half of it, knowing that this would get it done. I'll show you in a second. So the point was to facilitate as opposed to facilitate and effectuate. It's just legalese nonsense. The point is you have to return him. And they're acting like they won something here. It's very childish, in my opinion.
court made their ruling last night very clear that it's the administration's responsibility to facilitate the return, not to effectuate the return. I believe the Department of Justice just filed another brief in the lower court. I would defer you to that for any updates. But as you mentioned, President Bukele will be here at the White House on Monday to talk about the cooperation that is at an all-time high. And we very much appreciate President Bukele and El Salvador's cooperation in the repatriation of El Salvadorian gang members who the previous administration allowed to infiltrate our country.
Right. So just narrative, like just didn't even answer the question. Oh, and you mean all those people that are provenly not part of the gang, who have no criminal record, who are illegally, are evil terrorists committing human trafficking? Gross. Like, it's just whether they even know it or not. I'm of the mind that they know what they're doing. And I mean, like, even her. But recognize what we just did right there. He asked point blank, are you going to is he coming back with him? Because the court just ruled that, yes, you have to facilitate that. Now they're acting like, oh, would not effectuate. Facilitate is your responsibility is to bring him back. And if all of a sudden he's flying into the country and they don't bring him back and you act like there's some ongoing they're playing everybody. I mean, they're just straight up disregarding this in hopes that their screaming audience allows this to give them some kind of pressure, or rather some support in just ignoring Supreme Court rulings. So explain this to me. Well, again, I'm a little bit jumping ahead because maybe they will bring him back. But and what we've seen so far, but assuming they don't, think about the process of going in and presenting your case, taking it to the Supreme Court, presenting your information, and then not abiding by the ruling. It just shows you the way this government operates everywhere. The only thing they agree with is what gives them what they want. Now, going forward, again, Trump judge blocked the deportations. This was just to remind me of the starting point. And this was the conversation we had about the Trump judge doing so. I'll include this for you in case you wanted to read through it. And we also know that even with Mohammed Khalil, it was now proven, and here's the actual document from Rubio, that point blank admits that he did not break any laws, that what he did was literally otherwise lawful. Right? So didn't break the law. No, not even a claim that he supports Hamas. No evidence of anything other than they think what he said, his ideas, compromise U.S. foreign policy, which was, by the way, Israel's committing genocide, which is what the world is calling out. Pressed for evidence against Khalil, the government cites its power to deport people for beliefs. It has never been more clear in this conversation. It's exactly what you might have called out on the right, what Obama was going to do, or Clinton might have done, or Kamala and Biden were about to do. The moment it happens in earnest on your side, it's funny how nobody wants to call it out. Now, here's an article from today. U.S. Supreme Court tells Trump administration to, again, that's what she was citing, to facilitate the return of Salvadorian man deported, who they have claimed was an error. They admitted a mistake, and now they're not taking responsibility for it. These are the small messages that trickle down into society, guys. The average people that are going, well, geez, if the president of the United States is not taking responsibility for what he made a mistake on, why would I? Even subconsciously. Rampant lawlessness. Money doesn't trickle down. That does. But it goes on to say the U.S. Supreme Court directed President Donald Trump's administration on Thursday, this was yesterday, to facilitate the return of Garcia to the United States. The court's decision came after the Justice Department asked the justices to throw out an April 4th order by Judge Paula Zenas requiring the administration to, quote, facilitate and effectuate the return. His name full is Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Now, here's what's funny about this. So facilitate means make easier an action or process, right? Schools were located on the same campus to facilitate the sharing of resources, right? So you could argue that they can try and construe this as like just do what we can. It's not what it means in a legal sense here. As you can continue forward and recognize that overall, especially from a legal definition, like your responsibility is to be in the process, to facilitate this. Maybe Bukele is the one that has to bring him, but you're the one that's supposed to be petitioning him to make it happen, to even pay for it to come back. Effectuate, to put into force or operation, right? So all they're trying to do now is act like, because they're abusing the definitions of these words, pretending like they don't know what that means, saying that, no, that means that he has to be the one to do it. We're just supposed to help where we can. That's not the legal ruling. That's not the reality. But that's how the Trump administration is playing the game when it comes to human lives, even though they know what they did is wrong because they admitted that. It says in court, is in an unsigned decision, said that the judge's order, quote, properly requires the government to facilitate Garcia's release from custody and to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador. The administration, meanwhile, quote, should be prepared to share what it can concerning the steps it has taken and the prospect of further steps. So you see, they know what they're doing here, guys. They made the calculated decision, it seems to me, because there was pushback from within the court to say, okay, fine, we'll take away effectuate, because it'll get to what their argument is. Oh, you're stepping on executive authority. It's just funny how this is playing out. The point here is they're saying, okay, fine, you have to facilitate the process, but you're also required to give us the steps you're taking to do so. How much you want to bet that doesn't happen, which is what they keep doing. Now, it says Zenas, in an order late on Thursday, yesterday, after the Supreme Court's ruling, said the United States must take all available steps to facilitate the return of Garcia to the United States as soon as possible. So all available steps and as soon as possible. Neither of those things seem to be happening. The Supreme Court upheld the district judge's order that the government has to bring Kilmar home. So that is the ruling, you understand. Now they need to stop wasting time and get it moving, said the other judge. A Justice Department spokesperson said the court's ruling recognized that it is, quote, the exclusive prerogative of the president to conduct foreign affairs. So they're basically just trying to muddy the conversation here, acting like by the judge saying that you're required to rectify your mistake, but because they use the word effectuate, that somehow that's the judge dictating foreign policy. I mean, legally, I guess that persuades some judges, and it's not necessarily wrong, but it is an abuse of the way this is working because reality is that is their responsibility, and there's precedent for that. There's been many cases of the past of either deliberate, but it seems wrong deportations, mistaken deportations, where the Supreme Court ruled they had to be brought back, and the previous presidents complied because it was a mistake. I mean, it's very simple. But this is like, it shows you, I already made the point. They have no interest in correcting their mistakes, even when they're hurting people. Now it says Justice Department lawyers in a Supreme Court brief had argued that the judge's order, hold on, did I skip one? Yeah, it says, quote, by directly noting the deference owed to the executive branch. This ruling once again illustrates that activist judges, this is the White House spokesperson, do not have the jurisdiction to seize control of the president's authority. None of that was happening. It's just such a gross overstatement of what we're talking about, which is why they were like, fine, then facilitate it and show us what you're doing. Because it's clear they're trying to make this into the politicized version of this, which I guarantee all of them are politicized, but the idea that the judge is somehow trying to overtake their authority. Look, you admitted you made a mistake. The judge is saying, correct the mistake. And your effort is to try to make it out to be a political manipulation. I don't know why anybody falls for this stuff. Even though there very clearly is political manipulation, that's not what that is to me. Justice Department lawyers and Supreme Court, make sure, did I skip that too? No, I read that. Okay. Justice Department's lawyers in a Supreme Court brief had argued that the judge's order, by requiring the Trump administration to specifically, in the word effectuate, his return, had impermissibly encroached on presidential authority on foreign relations on the violation of the U.S. Constitution's separation of powers between its judicial and executive branches. Oh, lovely. So now we care about the Constitution when it suits their interests. But over here, we don't care about it because you don't like what Biden did, or because these people have the wrong skin color, because we don't like what they're saying out loud. How many different ways can we recognize the blatant hypocrisy, the double standards of government in general, but specifically the U.S. government? So you're going to point to the Constitution to make your point, but you're going to ignore it everywhere else where it suits your interest. Is anybody going to call that out? The United States does not control the sovereign nation of El Salvador, it says, this is their quote, nor can it compel El Salvador to follow a federal judge's bidding. No one's claiming you can, bud. No one said that. What they're claiming is you have to do what you can to correct the mistake. And how simple that would be to go, hey man, bring him back. We'll fund it. Is he's going to go, no. Then you're going to say, fine, then we won't pay for it anymore. So now you're paying for the guy that you want to keep. Obviously, if you're paying for him to be held, then we'll simply go, fine, here he is back. It's a transaction. They're just playing people for fools. The Supreme Court has a 6-3 conservative majority. which I think is very important to understand, especially with the rulings we're seeing right now, as they want to make this about political activism when you can see that the Supreme Court even just ruled 9-0 about them having to bring him back. So what about that? Are we still pretending it's all political activism now? Or only when it suits your interests? It says it's the 3 liberal justices on Thursday issued a statement agreeing with the court's decision, but said that they would have denied the administration's request outright. To this day, the government has cited no basis in law for Garcia's warrantless arrest. They have not. His removal to El Salvador or his confinement in El Salvador prison, nor could it. So in case you're still not understanding, all of them, all 6 conservative and all 3 liberal judges agreed that they have to bring him back. The point is the liberal judges simply said they would have gone even further, which maybe makes sense to you, but don't miss the main point there, that they all agree that what Trump did was wrong, or rather the U.S. government, to be specific, or I guess accurate. Now it says Sotomayor added that the administration had requested, quote, an order from this court permitting it to leave Garcia in El Salvador, a husband and a father without a criminal record in a Salvadorian prison for no reason recognized by law. I mean, this is my point, guys. On the record, they're going, okay, will you let us just ignore it? Can we just leave him there forever, please? I mean, not only does that show a lack of morals, a lack of concern, or even a lack of interest in rectifying your proven mistakes, it just shows you the kind of people we're dealing with. Thank God that they stood up for it, even the conservative judges. Now, it says Garcia is married to an American citizen with whom he is raising a U.S. citizen child. Now, as far as I understand it, marrying somebody gives you U.S. citizenship, right? At least a green card. That's the point. They're just desperately trying to frame them all as evil villains and illegal aliens, when most of the central cases that even they're pointing to are none of those things. It says he had never been charged with or convicted of any crime. And it says his lawyers have pointed out, who have denied the Justice Department's allegations that he's a member of the gang. Now, look, this has been put forward. The information has been discussed. The lawyers have put it out there. They have presented their evidence against him, and the best they can do, as we've already showed you, is an old arrest from 2019 at a Home Depot where he was picked up and released without charge. And because they notated that it was about MS-13, they've used that to claim he's a leader. They've presented no evidence to back it up, and that's what the Supreme Court just ruled, that they have no evidence, and now they haven't tried, and nor could they. And just for good measure, just tacked on human trafficking. That's what Leave It said. They've never even tried to make that claim in court. Certainly circulating the social media first, right? Now it says the Justice Department and Supreme Court filing on April 7th said that while Garcia was deported to El Salvador through an administrative error, that's their quote, his actual removal from the United States was not an error. The error, department lawyers wrote, was in removing him specifically to El Salvador despite the protection order. So what they're trying to pretend, and nobody agrees with this, not even the Supreme Court, because they've already ruled that even if you're going to use that act, you got to give them due process, that they're simply saying we just sent him to the wrong country. Because that was the main point, is he had an order that he was legally, the judge gave him asylum because of what was happening in El Salvador. You know, a place where bad things are happening, but the country, your leadership, freedom of the world, they're working with those people. Same with Israel, same with Saudi Arabia, same with, pretty much all the worst people on the planet. The point, though, is that they're claiming that just sending him there was the mistake. So they're going to probably bring him away from there and send him somewhere else. I'm willing to bet you anything that's actually what happens. That ultimately they just send him to another country and they act like that rectifies the mistake. That's not what any of them have ruled. He's required to be, they need to present evidence that he's even part of anything they claimed, because he's not here illegally, and he's not no criminal record. It says Garcia received a 2019 judgment in the United States granting him protection from removal to El Salvador after an immigration judge determined he would face prosecution from gangs in that country. It's almost like a cosmic joke that he's now put in a prison with people under the guise that he's part of those gangs. Now, it says Zenas, in her ruling, found that in 2019, this is what I'm referencing, and this is public information we've already shown you, source material, you can look at it for yourself, hopefully you already did. She found that in 2019, order prohibiting Garcia's removal to El Salvador was still in place. She found that his removal ran afoul of federal immigration law and likely violated procedural protections granted by the U.S. Constitution. Clearly, Garcia's detention appears wholly lawless, she claimed, and that there were no legal grounds whatsoever for his arrest, detention, or removal. The Richmond, Virginia-based 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals on April 7th rejected the administration's request to freeze the judge's order. So all over the place, guys. See, you're just not hearing this in the mainstream alternative media. One after another, they're losing a lot of ground on this. It says on Monday, it let Trump pursue deportations of alleged Venezuelan gang members using the 1798 law that historically had been employed on wartime, but with certain limits. That's the point they're all ignoring. Not with limits, really, just they have to abide by the law, which is due process, evidence presented, and so on, which they seem to not care about. Now, this is a little bit of a repeat. This is just the next day. This is today. Judge orders government to lay out steps for return of wrongly deported man. And I think really the main thing in this, we already told you that. They're simply saying you have to prove what you're doing when they're not really complying. It says Zena said the government must also outline steps. His return by Friday, that's by today, this morning at 9:30, which I don't think they've done. It says, to this end, the court hereby amends this order to direct the defendants take all appropriate available steps to facilitate his return. Lastly, the Huffington Post, Trump administration won't give up info on location of deported Maryland man. So see, there's something very wrong happening here. Now it says the Trump administration must begin providing daily updates about the location of Garcia, which they're refusing to do, apparently. Now it says the judge, Zenas, expressed frustration with the Department of Justice during a short hearing today after they flatly told her, after being told they were required to give information, that they did not have any information. So this is what the frustration is for Ovid. They're playing games. They could have said that last time, but they agreed and said, okay, and came back to court saying, we don't have any information. Quote, the Supreme Court has spoken quite clearly, and yet I can't get an answer, she said. Zenas directed the Justice Department to provide daily updates, not just about where Garcia actually is, but about what efforts the government has undertaken, which is exactly what she said last time. They're wasting everybody's time. They're wasting resources, while being efficient, apparently, and just basically lying to the world. Now, Katie Bueller, this is the ruling we were talking about. This was yesterday. Just so you have the documents, you could look through for yourself, as we do on this platform. A 9-0, 6 conservative justices, 9-0 court upholds the order of requiring Trump administration to return Garcia. And now they're publicly dragging their feet and going, we don't know what, we don't have any information. You mean aside from having a phone call to Bukele who's coming here? That's not, it's insulting to your intelligence to pretend like this is not obvious. Now, Melnick, a lawyer in the conversation, says the Board of Immigration Appeals has been reduced, apparently, from 28 members to 15. An action which, coincidentally, he says, purges every single board member appointed by Biden. Now, my point in this is the same as every other conversation. Every single administration tries to appoint the judges that they think will be amenable to their agendas. It's no different from any side of this. So my point in this is it's not just Trump bad, Biden and the rest, or Democrat, Republican. They're always doing the same things. In this case, if you're trying to understand this from a legal perspective, there's a situation here where you have an appeals court, which will be very relevant as these things come to pass, where they've just kind of purged anybody they think won't blindly agree with what they have to say. That's not how this system is supposed to work, but they clearly are telling you that's how it's going to work. And you should care. If you care about constitutional rights, if you care about the law, if you care about what this country pretends it is. Now, he also points out that over 650 known cases so far. This is 6 universities in Georgia, international grad students in the STEMs fields. And I believe that's what, it's like high-level science field. What is that again? It's not coming up immediately. Just give me in the chat if you remember what that stands for. So basically people that are going in university, high-level grad students, have in the STEMs field, have had their visas revoked. The school, this person's, this is a MSNBC, I'm told, is shocked and figuring out how to respond. Now, yet again, guys, these are people who are legally in this country, who have according to their own documentation, not broken the law. They're simply people who are supporting, pro-Palestine protests, calling out Israel, X, Y, and Z. Or in many cases, what we're finding is just like they say, they have traffic tickets, for example. And that's what he says here. 650 known cases. Now, by the way, my point is I'm willing to bet you that you could find most every one of these have some connection back to speaking out about Israel or speaking out about, pro-Palestinian information. But it says over 650 known cases so far. Most have nothing to do with advocacy in regard to the conversation. The admin seems to be engaging in a breakneck effort to kick out every foreign student who has had even the most minor interaction with the police possible, including things like traffic citations. I mean, even J.D. Vance tried to tell you that Garcia had traffic tickets, which makes him not father of the year. Are you kidding me? Like not every American in the country has had traffic tickets? Funny how that comes back up, right? There's a reason they point these things out. But also jaywalking tickets. That's not a joke. He's got it linked for you right there. Now, this is another lawyer speaking up, and it is Houston-based immigration attorney. And he says, talk to a lady who was arrested for simple assault. She broke the nose of a guy trying to force himself on her. Cops arrested both to figure it out, got a letter saying she was the victim, but she was removed anyway. And this is hold on, make sure I didn't go too far. That's weird. God, Twitter is so wonky, man. Anyway, so he captions this and says, here's another example of a foreign student the Trump admin is trying to kick out. A woman who was the victim of a sexual assault, who had a letter from the cops confirming she was the victim, and the arrest wasn't proof of anything. And yet they're trying to deport her for that crime. Now, my point is the same as I genuinely think this is for one reason. And I think that if you really dig into these, that you'll find some association with them to some group they claim is speaking up against foreign policy at the very least. But this person responds by saying, wow, in regard to what he said, Lauren Riley's killer is an example of an illegal alien the Biden admin was trying to allow in illegally to avoid legal crossings, a man who was a criminal. Something that has nothing to do with this conversation in regard to the person we're talking about, which is what he says. What a ridiculous and insulting comment. You take the name of a woman murdered by a heinous monster and use it to justify literally anything that might be anti-immigrant, no matter how utterly irrelevant it is to the person's case we're talking about. That is disgusting. And he also adds to this, which, by the way, looks like this was removed. That's interesting. That's probably because he captioned it and says, what we're talking about people with student visas. And the point was they're saying they're all here illegally is what it was saying. That's why, at the very least, it shows you the person recognizes they were wrong and deletes it. But he says, we're talking about people here on student visas. My point I was going to make, now of course they deleted it, is that everybody's response from partisan side of they're supporting this is that response. They're here illegally anyway. And you're not even listening. That's not some kind of, well, they're here illegally, but they're no criminal. It's that they are here legally and they have no criminal record in many of the cases we're pointing to. And it's just infuriating that we have to keep banging our head against this wall. Oh, look, here it is right here. And there's already, the page was up from before. It says the correct term is anti-illegal immigration. We need to use the correct terminology. Immigration is a legal process. There are very few immigrants. That's very untrue. The point is he's talking about student visas. So they have legally gone through the process, but that's the response you get from people that are screaming that Trump's doing the right thing. And now it's gone. Lastly, an update on this very point. He simply points out it's up to 770 cases. So this is a lawyer confirming, however partisan you may think he is, which certainly there's probably some truth to that. The point, we all have our leanings. The point is that he's giving you links to prove this stuff for yourself, as always. And he's telling you that they've recognized 770 cases in the country of people who are falling into these, I wouldn't even call it falling between the cracks, that are being targeted for unjust reasons, who are having their rights completely disregarded, while basically ignoring the actual criminals in this country, the ones you think they're going after, just because they scream rapist and point to a brown person. It's pretty disgusting that we're even pretending this is not as bad as it looks. But hopefully people are going to pay attention, listen to people speaking up like Judge Napolitano, like Jeffrey Sachs, like any number of people who are telling you this is wrong. What's happening is wrong. Not even to say that the outcome you want to happen is necessarily wrong. There's a conversation to have. But the way they're doing this, like from the beginning to right now, is almost designed to make this fail. Or at the very least, designed to make this a kind of a collapsing moment for this country, where the outcome is still the same, where they just rush in some authoritarian justification for, because bad people that are being facilitated by them and their foreign allies. Just please take the time to look through the information, look at the source material, read these for yourself. And I don't mean the articles themselves. Look for the source material of the articles we're highlighting, which I've already gone through. Many cases I've already included for you, like the court documents, right? For those that are screaming about specifically Garcia or even Mahmoud, which was the one that Rubio put forward, that they're illegal aliens breaking the law, and you can then literally look at Marco Rubio's signed affidavit that says the opposite and still believe that, then you're just a dishonest person. But the point is, most of them aren't even going to that point. They're just going with the narrative that Marco Rubio yelled over the top. So in other words, trusting the government over facts that you can verify for yourself. Sort of like what you guys used to call about the Democrats. It's a two-party illusion. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for continuing to question everything. Please, I've had a couple people who have continued to make some of these clips. I've been tagging. If you like what we're doing and you want to clip out parts of the show, make a clip, put it on your platforms, whatever it is, tag me on whatever platform it is, I'll share it. I mean, really the point is to help get this information reach out there. Include the source material is what I recommend, is what I request, so people can know where to look. At the very least, the link to the show so they can go back to the source material, which I add right after the show every time, unless the rare occasion I make a mistake, which does happen in regard to either not saving the links or so on, but that's very rare. But thank you for tuning in today. I appreciate you all and all that you're doing out there to fight for this, because it is important. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
This starts, and it's really fascinating to go back. It starts in 1996 with Netanyahu, who wrote a book called Fighting Terrorism. And the thesis of the book is quite straightforward and very dangerous. He says, there's Hamas, there's Hezbollah, they oppose Israel. It's not good for us to fight them directly. That won't work. What we need to do is topple the governments that back them. So what we need is regime change throughout the Middle East. And he actually gave a long list of 7 countries that included Syria, Libya, Iraq, Iran, Somalia, Sudan, and Lebanon. And systematically, the United States has done Netanyahu's bidding for almost 30 years now, going to war with every one of them, except for the big one that Netanyahu so much longs for, which is the war directly between the United States and Iran.